Chapter 429. Nyan was 6 years old. Without the company of her parents, the boring time seemed to pass faster and faster. In the blink of an eye, the little girl had already graduated from Dongweiman kindergarten. It was time for her to go to primary school, August 30th, reporting day. Early in the morning, after Qin Yongyan helped the little girl wash up, the two of them got on the bus and then went to the primary school affiliated to Capital University, located near Zuanwaman. This was the growth path that she had planned for the little girl a long time ago. Therefore, after Nyan graduated from Dongweiman kindergarten, she didn't even have to go for an interview. She directly got a place to enroll in Capital University affiliated primary school. And because of her, the two brothers naturally easily got two very precious places. Because they had been living with Xia Kaiji recently, the two brothers couldn't report with Nyan today. They could only arrange to meet her at the reporting office later. Qin Yongyan originally thought that Nyan would inevitably feel a little scared and even unwilling to go to school when she suddenly changed to an unfamiliar environment. Therefore, before they left, Qin Yongyan was actually mentally prepared for a tough battle. But what he never expected was, after Nyan walked into this unfamiliar school, her face didn't have the usual fear and uneasiness that was commonly seen on other children. Instead, it was like she was touring a park. While she walked slowly to the reporting office, her eyes were constantly looking at the classmates who passed by her. To be honest, with her calm appearance, she didn't look like a first-grade child who had just entered school at all. Instead, she looked more like a 4- or 5th-grade child. As one of the top experimental primary schools in the country, the Capital Affiliated Primary School was not a private school. Therefore, the moment one entered the school, it gave off a feeling of simple elegance with green bricks and gray tiles. There was also a quiet, beautiful, scholarly, and rich cultural atmosphere. This extremely scholarly atmosphere naturally formed a sharp contrast with the childlike atmosphere of the kindergarten. In addition, there was also a fundamental difference between primary school and kindergarten. After all, kindergarten was mainly for the experience of life, while primary school was where the real learning began. Such as the timetable, work and rest schedule, exam results, homework, and other nightmarish things would also haunt them from this moment on until they became adults. And it was also from today onwards that Nyan had a new identity, namely, students. Yes, primary school students. Nyan was assigned to Year 1, Class 2. This class assignment method was randomly assigned by the computer, so after the little fellow sat in the classroom, she waited for a long time but did not see the brothers. Qin Yongyan asked the teacher and found out that the two brothers had been assigned to Year 1 Class 3 next door. It was a sad story. Qin Yongyan was worried that the little girl would be scared, so he quickly comforted her and promised that he would find a way to put her in the same class as the two brothers. Who would have thought that the little fellow only nodded blankly after hearing this, and did not show any extreme reaction. On the other hand, the two brothers in the next class were so anxious that they were about to cry because they couldn't find Nyan. The first graders had just graduated from kindergarten, so they more or less carried the habits they had developed in kindergarten. Therefore, the classroom gradually quieted down after the homeroom teacher and the subject teacher arrived. The homeroom teacher first did a simple self-introduction, then began to distribute various kinds of information collection forms to the parents. This was the first time parents and teachers met. The first graders couldn't sit still, so the whole process didn't take very long. After the homeroom teacher took back the forms, she asked the parents to follow her to the multimedia classroom, where the school would officially hold a parent conference for the first graders. During this time, the children in each class had to stay in the classroom and be led by the teacher to play games with them. After the parent conference ended, the children would be familiar with the school environment, and the new students' registration would be completed successfully. They only had to wait for school to officially start the day after tomorrow. There were no problems with the school's arrangements. However, after Qin Yongyan followed the homeroom teacher to the multimedia classroom, there was a small commotion in Year 1 Class 2. As for the reason for the commotion, it was completely because of an unlucky brat. After the parents followed the homeroom teacher to the multimedia classroom, the children were guided by the teacher to play with plasticine. Nyan was wearing a white dress today. Qin Roying personally picked it for her. With her rosy cheeks and big watery eyes, she looked very stunning. Yes, just like her mother back then. With such an outstanding appearance and a faint fragrance on her body, the boys in the class would peek at her from time to time from the moment she walked into the classroom. Children at this age still had a vague understanding of gender, and it was more out of curiosity. Beauty was innate because it was determined by genes. Most children would enter the aesthetic sensitivity stage when they were 3 years old. They would even choose colors that they liked, such as red, blue, etc. Therefore, don't think that children couldn't distinguish between beauty and ugliness. Not only did adults like beautiful women, but children also liked beautiful women. Nian was clearly a living beauty. Most children were very obedient, but there were always a few exceptions, which was commonly known as brats. Unfortunately, there was a brat sitting diagonally behind Nian. Although this brat was only 6 years old this year, he was very mischievous. He was not afraid of parents or teachers at all. It seemed that when he was in kindergarten, he was the tyrant of the class. Nian was so cute, so the brat naturally had his eyes on her from the beginning. Of course, this brat's heart was not as dirty and dark as the adults. He just instinctively wanted to get close to Nian. However, the way he approached others was completely unacceptable to ordinary people. This brat took advantage of the time when the teacher was teaching the other children to play with plasticine to climb to the ground and quietly crawl behind Nian. He wanted to lift Nian's skirt, just like he used to lift other people's skirts. However, just as he held the little girl's skirt tightly with a smirk on his face, the little girl who was seriously playing with the plasticine seemed to have been prepared. She suddenly stood up from her seat and slapped him directly in the face. Slap. Nian did not use much strength, but the crisp sound of the slap alarmed the entire classroom. The brat was stunned. He was stunned for a long time. When he saw the teacher rush over, the brat's grievance seemed to have found an outlet. He couldn't help but burst into tears. Chen Nian. What are you doing? Chapter 430. Chen Nian. Compared to the recently popular names like Zixuan, Sini, Sihan, and Kursan, the little girl's name seemed particularly ordinary. But because of her outstanding appearance, the teacher remembered this child who was as cute as a porcelain doll at a glance. She didn't know if it was a psychological effect, but most people would discover a strange phenomenon during their school days, and that was, a good-looking girl would usually be the class monitor of the class. Of course, the prerequisite was that the girl had self-respect and self-respect. Perhaps it was because their beautiful appearance gave them more attention, but at the same time, it also gave them more pressure. In addition, girls matured early, so these girls were usually more mature and sensible than ordinary children. Nian's appearance was already very outstanding, and in addition, she was influenced by rich spirit energy all year round. So even if she didn't cultivate, she had a temperament that was far superior to other children her age. Therefore, the moment the teacher saw her, she had already listed the little girl as a candidate for class monitor. If her performance in the future was good and her results could keep up with the rest of the team, this position would obviously be decided internally. But no one would have thought that the little girl who easily gained the approval of all the teachers would beat another child to tears on the first day of school. The naughty child sat on the ground and cried loudly, while Nian stood there and looked at him coldly. Seeing this, the teacher couldn't help but be angry, so she couldn't help but scold her. However, Nian didn't defend herself. Instead, she pursed her lips and looked indifferent. School bullying was a situation that occurred in every school and even every class. As one of the top teachers in the country, the teachers of the capital-affiliated primary school naturally did a lot of research in this area. The naughty child deliberately cried loudly, hoping that the teacher would be biased towards him. Fortunately, the teacher wasn't a fool, so before confirming the truth, she didn't dare to make a conclusion. Seeing that Nian didn't continue to beat him, the teacher came between the two children and patiently asked the reason. In fact, when the teacher realized that the naughty child wasn't in his seat, she had a guess in her heart. So, she immediately relaxed her expression and tried to communicate with the little girl. Chen Nian, tell me, why did you bully your classmate? Hearing this, the little girl pouted and replied stiffly, Daddy said that no one is allowed to lift my skirt. I'm a girl, whoever lifts my skirt is a pervert. Dad said that this is a matter of principle, so, I must give him a good thrashing." The little fellow's words were loud and clear, full of righteousness. After hearing this, the teacher didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He was right, but how old was this child? How would she know anything about erotic things? It was probably just for fun. Teacher understood the entire process of what had happened. In such a situation, it was wrong to favor either side. The naughty brat had sneakily come over to lift her skirt, but he didn't expect that this time he would lift a steel plate, so she raised her hand and gave him a slap. It was wrong to lift her skirt, but it was even more wrong to hit her. Therefore, after the teacher pointed out the two children's mistakes, she asked them to apologize to each other. "Chen Nian, if you encounter such a situation in the future, you can tell teacher directly. Teacher will definitely criticize him severely, but you have to remember, you're not allowed to hit anyone in the future, understand?" The teacher felt that the nature of hitting someone was worse, so she asked Nian Nian to apologize to the naughty brat first. Unexpectedly, after Nian Nian heard this, she immediately frowned and replied stubbornly, "I won't. He's a pervert. I don't want to apologize to a pervert." Perhaps it was because the movie, Su Yuan, had left a very serious psychological shadow on Shen Shi, so he had always been very concerned about the issue of indecency. Actually, to put it more bluntly, the naughty brat's behavior was indecent. Age wasn't a reason to make a mistake, nor was it an excuse to avoid making a mistake. Scourges were cultivated slowly. If a mistake was made and a random excuse was found to cover it up, there would obviously be more girls who would be unlucky in the future. Why did you not teach your child well, but my child was the one who was hurt? This was a matter of principle. Therefore, Chen Shi's attitude had always been absolutely unforgivable, absolutely unforgiving. Nian Nian had obviously inherited Chen Shi's teachings. Therefore, when she heard that the teacher actually asked her to apologize to the naughty brat, Nian Nian suddenly became confused. Pervert. Shameless. I'm not going to apologize to a pervert. Bah. The little girl's reaction was somewhat out of the teacher's expectations. She called him a pervert here and there, and the last, bah, deeply hurt the naughty brat who was lying on the ground pretending to be innocent. This was great. Seeing that the whole class was watching the show, the naughty brat who had to bear the name of pervert suddenly felt a little embarrassed. After all, he was still a child. The teacher was busy correcting Nian Nian's mistake, so she didn't notice the naughty brat's thoughts. When the naughty brat saw that everyone seemed to be laughing at him, his mentality instantly exploded. After a loud cry, he ran out of the classroom while crying. Well, this time he was really crying. Seeing this, the teacher quickly chased after him. But this naughty brat ran like a thief, and in a flash, he jumped into the multimedia classroom next door. The parents were having a meeting in the multimedia classroom, and this tragic cry immediately attracted everyone's attention. While everyone was still wondering what was going on outside, a rather good-looking young woman directly rushed out of the classroom. Nonsense, as a mother, how could she not know whose child was crying? As expected. As soon as the beautiful young woman went out, she saw the naughty brat who was covering his face and running wildly. "Yang Yang? Come here, mommy is here." "What's wrong? Who bullied you?" "Don't cry, tell mommy, mommy will help you." After seeing his mother, not only did the naughty brat not stop crying, but he also cried even more heartbreakingly. The naughty brat's cries echoed in the corridor classroom, as one could imagine how wronged he must have been. Fortunately, the school didn't officially start today, and in such a big school, there were only freshmen like them, or else where would the school put its face? The parent-teacher conference was forced to be suspended. The principal walked out of the multimedia classroom with a gloomy face. A group of head teachers and head teachers followed behind the principal expressionlessly, but in their hearts, they had already started cursing. Which class was this child from? Was the teacher who took care of this child an idiot? Didn't he know that today was the registration day? The principal had just introduced the school's teaching staff and teaching atmosphere to the parents, but in the end, the other side slapped their faces? The head teachers of each class silently prayed in their hearts, only hoping that this unlucky child was not from their class, the principal, teachers, parents. A group of people walked out of the multimedia classroom in such a grandiose manner. When the head teacher of Year 1 Class 2 realized that this naughty brat was actually from Year 1 Class 2, she fell silent. The head teachers of the other classes suddenly had a very strange expression on their faces. Hee, there was a good show to watch. Please remember the domain name of this book. .com, wonderful book mobile version website. .com. Chapter 431. The naughty child cried until the sky darkened. No matter what the parents asked him, he just pointed at the classroom and kept sobbing. Looking at his pitiful appearance, those who didn't know would think that he had been wronged. It was normal for first graders to cry. It shouldn't have caused such a big commotion. Unfortunately, the child's mother wasn't someone to be trifled with. The teacher who rushed out tried to calm the situation, but the beautiful young woman didn't listen to her at all. Seeing that the child couldn't stop crying, the young woman took her son directly to the door of the multimedia classroom. Then, she squatted at the door and slowly coaxed her son. From the beginning to the end, she didn't say a word to the teacher. Instead, she silently comforted her son. And this was actually the highest level of a shrew. She didn't make a fuss, she didn't hang herself, she just looked on coldly and laughed. She didn't even do anything hysterical or embarrassing. She just silently stood at the door with the child. At that moment, all the teachers present, including the principal, couldn't help but feel a little scared. They instantly understood that today's matter might not be easy to resolve. The naughty child's crying interrupted the meeting, and at the same time, it caused a burst of discussion among the parents. The young woman didn't do anything extreme, and the school couldn't forcibly take the crying child away. Therefore, seeing that the head of the year department couldn't communicate with her, the principal could only temporarily stop the meeting. He personally promised the young woman that he would give her a satisfactory explanation after he found out the reason. After the young woman heard the principal's promise, she whispered a few words in the naughty child's ear. It was strange, the naughty child who couldn't be coaxed heard his mother's words and his originally tragic cries suddenly became sobbing. Is this an Oscar-winning actor? Seeing this, the teachers couldn't help but silently complain in their hearts. Everyone was an adult, so how could they not understand the twists and turns in the story? This woman knew how to use the rules, and at the same time, she understood the principle of the weak defeating the strong. It was obvious how angry the principal was to be involved in such a mess on the first day of school. Therefore, after the principal gave the task of presiding over the meeting to the head of the year department, he quickly walked out of the multimedia classroom with the class teachers. When the parents saw this, they ignored the age director's advice and hurriedly followed the principal out of the multimedia classroom. After confirming that the troublemaker wasn't their child, the parents returned to their seats and discussed the aftermath of the incident. It's so hard to get a place in the capital-affiliated primary school. Looks like there aren't any left. I wonder whose unlucky child this is. Won't father and mother be angered to death this time? After all, today was not even the first day of school. It was just a reporting day, but it turned out to be such a big deal. If nothing unexpected happened, this child who hit someone would probably be treated as an example and expelled directly by the school. Of course, according to the rules of the 9-year compulsory education, schools could not directly expel or dissuade students. But the school could give the students holidays. Other than making things difficult for them, the school had many other ways to make students transfer schools voluntarily. Moreover, today was only the registration day, and the information had not yet been submitted for review. The principal could delete the child's information at any time. Perhaps it was out of sympathy for the loss of a rabbit, but the group of parents immediately decided to repeatedly educate their children in the future. They must not make any mistakes and be expelled from school. Back to the principal. After the group of people arrived at the door of Year 1 Class 2's classroom, they did not directly enter the classroom. Instead, they asked the teacher to go in and call out the troublemaker. Nian Nian obediently followed the teacher out of the classroom. As soon as they stepped out of the door, the naughty child who had been crying non-stop looked as if he had seen his father's murderer. He immediately pointed at Nian Nian and shouted excitedly, "Mother, it's her. She's the one who hit me. Here. It hurts." After saying that, the naughty child raised his head and signaled his mother to see the palm print on his face. He was a child after all, and his skin was very delicate. Although Nian did not use much strength, this slap was still solid and left a faint mark on his face. The young woman saw the palm print on the child's face, but she did not do anything. Instead, she silently looked at the principal. In this case, the principal naturally had to understand the situation first. Therefore, the teacher immediately went forward to explain. This was the capital's affiliated primary school, and all the children were enrolling on the first day. Naturally, the teacher could not be biased. Therefore, when the principal heard the whole story, he immediately agreed with the way the teacher handled it. The teacher did not do anything wrong. If it were any other school or any other teacher facing this situation, they would have done the same. It was wrong to lift the skirt, but it was even more wrong to hit someone. Therefore, there was nothing wrong with the judgment that the person who hit someone should apologize first, and the troublemaker should apologize later. But the problem now was, Nian was like a tortoise who ate a scale today. No matter how the teacher communicated with her, she was determined not to admit that she was wrong. And children, in addition to being particularly prone to crying, actually had another characteristic, and that was, they were especially stubborn. They were even more stubborn than adults. Standing in front of her was the principal, the young woman holding the naughty child's hand, and the teacher in charge of each class. The teachers said one after another to guide the little fellow. As long as she apologized, the principal obviously would not make things difficult for this 6-year-old child. But unfortunately, Nian did not apologize. She even said in front of the principal that she was determined not to apologize again. "I'm not apologizing. I'm not wrong. The person who lifted my skirt is a pervert. I'm not apologizing to a pervert." Even though she was surrounded in the middle, she did not show any fear on her face. In fact, it was not just the principal who came today. Even if God came, he would not be able to change her mind. Because this was a matter of principle that she had repeatedly emphasized to her. Time had smoothed out our edges and corners, and time had eroded our hearts. The 6-year-old Nian had not learned to be flexible. Therefore, her father's words were the truth sword in her hand, and also her stubbornness. Even if the whole world said that you were wrong, it was okay, her father was here. Seeing that the little fellow was still unwilling to admit her mistake, the principal could only sigh deeply in the end. Then, he turned to the teacher and asked, "Where are the child's parents? Didn't they come out with us?" Hearing this, the teachers could not help but look at each other. They suddenly knew that things were not good. As expected. Seeing that the little fellow's parents did not appear, the principal directly said to the teacher in charge of Year 1 Class 2, "Inform her parents, this kind of child, our school can't educate her." Didn't I write it wrong before? So, I'll write it according to my idea. What I want to write is about Nian's growth. So, I hope you understand, under the protection of an eagle will never grow up. Please remember the domain name of this book, 9 Heavens God Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 432. This kind of child, our school can't educate her. Wasn't the meaning of this sentence clear enough? The principal was trying to dissuade the little girl. Although she was only a 6-year-old child, Nian's actions today had already crossed the line. And the worst thing was, no matter how the teacher tried to guide her, Nian was determined not to admit that she was wrong. Under these circumstances, even if the principal wanted to give her a chance to repent, he couldn't find a suitable reason to do so. After all, today was only the first day of school and not the usual day of classes. If she really entered the school, with this stubborn and violent temper of hers, who knew what kind of trouble she would cause in the future, this was a primary school affiliated to the capital, and at the same time, it was also the top public primary school in the country. He couldn't allow a single rat to spoil the entire pot of soup. The principal repeatedly deliberated for a long time. In the end, he made this seemingly unreasonable decision. Of course, the principal was actually very clear in his heart. For a 6-year-old child, her worldview had yet to be stabilized, so the child's every action was actually carried out according to the daily teachings of the parents. Rather than saying that it was the child's fault, it was more accurate to say that it was the parents' fault, but in the end, the child was the one to take the blame. Nian happened to bump into the muzzle of the gun, and because of this, she became the target of the principal's punishment. At this moment, no teacher spoke up to plead for her, and even the homeroom teacher of Year 1 Class 2 was silent. Seeing this, the young woman couldn't help but reveal a trace of satisfaction on her face. She gently touched the naughty child's face, as if hinting to her son, "Look, mother is standing up for you." Seeing that the principal had spoken, the homeroom teacher could only sigh deeply, then turned around and walked to the multimedia classroom, preparing to inform Chen Nian's parents to take the child away. But just as she was about to turn around, Qin Yongyan, who hadn't shown his face all this time, suddenly appeared behind her. Qin Yongyan had already stepped into the diviner realm. Although this level of cultivation couldn't achieve eternal youth, they could still maintain their appearance for decades. In order to not appear too different, Qin Yongyan deliberately made himself look a lot older, thus giving the impression that he was about 40 or 50 years old. With his cultivation level, he naturally knew what was going on outside. Therefore, as soon as he appeared, Qin Yongyan directly walked past the head teacher and came to the little girl. "Nian, come. Grandpa will take you home." He gently held the little fellow in his arms, and with a little force, the little fellow was lifted up by him. At this moment, the right or wrong of this matter was no longer important. Qin Yongyan respected Qin Shi's teaching methods, so as long as Nian believed that she was not wrong, then she really was not wrong. The one who was wrong was the brat and that beautiful woman. At the same time, it was also the school's education method. Isn't it just a small school affiliated to the capital? What's the big deal? Was this the only school in Huaxia? It's okay, Grandpa will change the school for you. Qin Yongyan didn't even bother to greet the principal. Under the gaze of all the teachers, he carried the little fellow and walked straight to the school gate. The little fellow silently lay in Qin Yongyan's arms. After Qin Yongyan carried her out of the school gate, she couldn't help but look back at the school that had driven her away on her first day. In fact, she felt very wronged. But she didn't cry from beginning to end. Because, her father once said, you can't cry when you're wronged. If you cry, it means you've lost. There's a group of people waiting to see you make a fool of yourself, especially those who have wronged you. The more wronged and sad you are, the happier and more complacent they will be. Qin Yongyan wasn't Qin Shi, so he didn't want to lower himself to the level of these ordinary people. The only solution he could think of was to change the school and environment for Nian. Therefore, after walking out of the school gate, Qin Yongyan took out his phone and called Wang Chuanju. Wang Chuanju was presiding over a department meeting, so she wouldn't have answered the phone. But she remembered that Qin Yongyan was an antique who didn't even use a cell phone. Something important must have happened if he suddenly called. Therefore, Wang Chuanju immediately stopped the meeting and walked out of the conference room with her phone. What? Transfer Nian? The capital-affiliated primary school is close to home and the quality of education is good. Why would she want to transfer schools? Wang Chuanju felt that Qin Yongyan's request was very strange, so she repeatedly asked over the phone. Qin Yongyan didn't want to say at first, but he couldn't stand her bombardment of questions, so he had to roughly explain the situation. But unexpectedly, after hearing the story, Wang Chuanju exploded on the spot. Even though they were separated by a door, her roar could be heard clearly in the conference room. What? Nian was expelled? Who did it? Don't go, I'll be right there. What do you mean I don't care? My granddaughter was bullied, and you want me to do nothing? Brother. I don't want to criticize you, but you really need to change your good temper. It's a good thing that Qin Shi isn't at home now. Otherwise, with his daughter's temper, wouldn't he tear down the school today? Okay, don't say any more, I'll be right there. It had to be said that Wang Chuanju was really efficient. In the time it took Qin Yongyan and the little girl to wait for the bus, she had already rushed over with a group of people. As soon as they got off the bus, Wang Chuanju directly squatted in front of the little girl, then gently hugged her into her arms and patiently asked, Nian, tell Grandma, what's going on today? Perhaps it was because Wang Chuanju was a woman. When the little girl saw her, she immediately pouted and said coquettishly, Dad said that I'll hit whoever lifts my skirt, but the teacher said that I did something wrong and wanted me to apologize to him. Speaking of this, the little girl suddenly paused, and for the first time, an expression of grievance and sadness appeared on her face. In fact, when everyone said that she was wrong, how could she not have doubted her own actions? After all, she was not some stubborn brat. Although Grandpa said that she did nothing wrong, the little girl still seemed to have some self-doubt, so she could not help but ask doubtfully, "Grandma, was I really wrong?" The so-called right and wrong itself was a subjective meaning. Perhaps as long as Wang Chuanju said that she was wrong, the little girl would immediately change her mind and take the initiative to apologize to the brat. She was very sensible. And it was precisely because she was sensible that she would not be easily persuaded by outsiders. Qin Yongyan was not an outsider, and Wang Chuanju was not an outsider either. So as long as one of them said that she was wrong, the little girl would seriously reflect on it. Fortunately, Wang Chuanju did not give her a chance to reflect, but directly carried her up and strode towards the school gate. "What wrong? Your grandpa has a soft temper, likes to settle everything peacefully, and is not easily calculative with others. Because of this character, he used to be bullied in the village, so don't learn from him. If you want to learn, learn from your father." Didn't your father often say this? We don't cause trouble, but we're not afraid of trouble either. Whether it's at school or elsewhere, in short, if you fall behind, you'll be beaten. If you're weak, you'll be bullied. So Nian, you must remember, in the future, if anyone dares to lift your skirt, you'll beat him hard for me. Because not only did your father say this, but your grandma also said this. With Wang Chuanju's encouragement, the doubts in the little girl's heart suddenly disappeared, and a smile finally appeared on her face again. Looking at the valiant and high-spirited Wang Chuanju striding into the school gate, Qin Yongyan could only helplessly shake his head at the side. No wonder Qin Shueqing's character was so tough. Wasn't it all because of Wang Chuanju's teaching? The two sisters of the Qin family, Ruoying and Lin Qing. One was gentle like water. One was as strong as fire. Who knew? Who would Nian look more like when she grew up? Please remember the domain name of the book. 9 Heavens God Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 433. With Wang Chuanju's strong appearance, there was a shocking turn of events. When the principal saw her take out a black ID, he immediately squeezed out a sincere smile on his face. It couldn't be helped. This was the world of adults. Their edges and corners had been smoothed out by time, and the corners of their mouths were raised into sophisticated smiles. Wang Chuanju was really too strong. No one knew what she said to the principal, but in a short while, Nian was led back to the classroom by the class teacher with a smile. Children didn't hold grudges, but when the naughty child saw Nian return to her seat as if nothing had happened, he couldn't help but have a flash of fear on his face. It was obvious that the naughty child was really afraid of this new classmate who beat him up at the slightest disagreement. Nian was still young, so she didn't understand what Wang Chuanju's appearance meant. But the beautiful young woman was very clear that she might have kicked an iron plate today. So when she came out of the principal's office, she hurriedly left the school with the naughty child, as if she didn't want to stay here any longer. As Nian returned to her seat, this farce also came to an end. Other than the naughty child being taken away by his mother, it was as if nothing had happened. And Nian, the freshman who dared to beat someone on the first day of registration, became famous because of this battle. Now, not only did the teachers in the school know that her background wasn't ordinary, even the students looked at her differently when they looked at her. After all, in a class, there were also class bullies other than top students. Fame was earned through fighting. The teachers didn't talk about what happened today, and the children were afraid that they would be the next to be beaten. So from today onwards, Nian was already firmly sitting on the throne of Year 1 Class 2. The teachers of each class took the students to tour the school and let the children familiarize themselves with the school environment. After that, the whole process of registration was over. The little guy was confused the whole day. After dinner, when she made a video call to Chen Shi, she told her father about it. She didn't expect that after Chen Shi heard about it, he repeatedly told her not to hit anyone in the future. As the saying goes, no one knows a son better than his father. Who doesn't know a father better than a son? Children were the closest people to their parents. How could they not be aware of the changes in their parents? Chen Shi's previous education had long been deeply ingrained in Nyan's mind, so when he suddenly proposed a completely different education concept at this moment, the little fellow immediately felt a little strange. Because these words were obviously in conflict with what Chen Shi had said before, and it was also completely different from what Grandma had said. Looking at the lifelike Chen Shi in the video, the little girl was at a loss. It was as if an error had occurred when a computer was running. The little guy's brain shut down. The child psychologist did not know the real Chen Shi, so he could only guide the little guy in the correct way. But no matter how perfect the imitation was, a fake would always be a fake. Therefore, this seemingly small oversight planted a seed of doubt in the little fellow's heart. Perhaps she wouldn't be able to detect any abnormalities in the short term. But if time passed, by the time the little fellow turned into a little girl, this clumsy lie would probably burst like a bubble. Fortunately, the little fellow was still young. Even if she felt a little strange, she didn't directly question it over the phone. As usual, Chen Shi comforted the little fellow, told her a few stories, and coaxed her to sleep. The little fellow nodded. But after hanging up the phone, she didn't seem to be sleepy at all. She turned over and directly leaned against Qin Ruoying. She still felt a little confused, so she leaned her head on her mother's shoulder and told her what she saw and heard today. Unfortunately, her mother was still sleeping quietly. The little fellow blinked and suddenly felt a little cold, so she softly called in the dark, "Big cat." Meow. After hearing her call, the big cat immediately jumped down from the beam and directly got into the little fellow's bed with a few leaps. Feeling the warmth from the big cat, the little guy blinked his eyes and turned to look at the window at the side. Tonight, the moonlight was like water. The moonlight shone through the window on the bedside. The little fellow hugged the big cat tightly and clung to Qin Ruoying. She couldn't help but murmur, "Big cat, where do you think Dad is going? Meow, when will he come back? Meow, I miss him so much." Perhaps he felt the strong longing in his daughter's heart. Chen Shi suddenly woke up from his meditation. Perhaps because he had been meditating for too long this time, the moment he woke up, Chen Shi even had the illusion that he was in a courtyard. But then, the endless darkness in front of him made him recognize the reality. Chen Shi was still floating in the darkness. Looking at the timer beside him, he found that he had been meditating for as long as 200 years. There was no 60-year cycle in the mountains, and no one knew the year after the winter. Last time, Chen Shi was imprisoned for 200 years. When his life was in danger, a light door appeared to save him. Now, another 200 years had passed, and the light door still hadn't appeared. In this regard, Chen Shi didn't panic at all. In fact, he had already guessed that the light door might be related to the mysterious woman. If he counted the time on Dragon Head Peak, the mysterious woman had actually saved him twice. Because the difference in their realms was too great, Chen Shi could only silently remember the woman's life-saving grace and didn't think about how to repay her. Chen Shi watched the woman being dragged away by the chains. Naturally, he couldn't pin his hopes on the mysterious woman to escape. This time, he could only rely on himself. The way to escape was actually very simple. He just needed to enter the void realm. After 200 years of meditation, Chen Shi was very sure that this dark space was actually not different from the big world. Both were small planes in the cracks of the void. It was just that the big world had been transformed by the grand pure divine ancestor, so it became a paradise that protected the ancient cultivators. Thinking of this, Chen Shi looked around the void. After getting up and stretching his body, he sat down again with his legs crossed. These 200 years were not in vain. He kept thinking about the true meaning of the word void in his mind and successfully found a clue. Chen Shi had already understood it, but because of the lack of clinical trials, he couldn't break through to the void realm. The tortoise-breathing secret technique allowed him to retain abundant true yuan, so Chen Shi now only needed to turn the deduction in his mind into reality. Void realm. Seeing through the void, training the spirit to return to the void. And this was the third level that cultivators had to step on. Please remember the domain name of the book, 9 Heavens Divine Emperor mobile version of reading website. Chapter 434. After 200 years of pondering and deliberating, Qin finally grasped the true meaning of the word void that his master once mentioned. What is void? It is the void and also the void. Seeing through the void and encompassing all things. Even if you haven't eaten pork, have you not seen a pig run? Qin had long known the main characteristics of Dongshu stage cultivators. They can freely travel through the universe, make summer mustard bags, and even open up their own small plane in the void. Apart from that, the biggest characteristic of Dongshu stage cultivators is that they are full of energy. Dongshu stage cultivators have reached the peak of their ability to sense and use the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Therefore, even if they don't actively guide it, they can easily influence the spiritual energy of heaven and earth nearby. Therefore, when Dongshu stage cultivators fight, any technique they use will be much more powerful than before. More importantly, as long as there is spiritual energy of heaven and earth nearby, Dongshu stage cultivators will never face the predicament of being exhausted. Because the speed at which they breathe in and out spiritual energy is far more than the consumption of their techniques. Therefore, in theory, Dongshu stage cultivators will have the absolute advantage even if they are surrounded by countless Yuanying stage cultivators. If we use gaming terms to describe it, it would be, Yuanying stage cultivators can't even break through the defense, how can they hurt Dongshu stage cultivators? Of course, the above is all that Qin can see. The significance of Dongshu stage is much more than that. Maybe the mysterious woman left too deep an impression on Qin, so after ending the tortoise-like state, Qin can no longer calm down. He can't help but think about the process of the woman's appearance. In a trance, Qin suddenly understands why he can't see the woman's face or hear her voice. That's because the woman is not in the same plane as him. Everything that Qin had seen before was merely a projection of the woman through countless small planes using her supreme magic power to appear in front of him. From the beginning to the end, the woman never really came to the dark space he was in. As for the terrifying aura that came after, Qin has reason to suspect. The Great Terror was actually trying to find out the true reason why the woman projected herself into this world. However, the woman had used some unknown method to prevent the Great Terror from discovering his existence. That was how Qin managed to survive. The two mysterious experts flashed past Qin's eyes like comets, but they left an extremely deep impression on him. Qin kept thinking about everything related to the mysterious woman. Purple flames and azure lightning. The mysterious woman had 9 chains. The Great Terror in the depths of the void, as well as his 200 years of contemplation and contemplation. All sorts of seemingly unrelated events converged together, suddenly. Qin understood. It was like playing the ice bucket challenge in the middle of winter. When a basin of ice water was poured over his head, he suddenly felt enlightened. The word void was too mysterious. It could be understood as both the void and nothingness. The former meant space, while the latter meant matter. In the dark space, there was only space and no matter. The only matter was himself. Just like the summer mustard seed bag, this dark space seemed endless, but in fact, it couldn't be any smaller. Since Qin was in the dark space, then he was part of the space, so the space was infinitely large for him. But if he jumped out of the space and looked back at this dark space, how big could it be? It might be as big as the sun, or as small as a speck of dust. But all of this, what did it have to do with him? He was no longer a reference object in it, but an observer outside of it. The sun might be big, but as long as he flew out of the solar system, the sun would become a tiny star. Everything was relative. Nothingness and the void. Space and matter. They seemed unrelated, but they were closely related. And this was obviously the so-called true meaning of the word void. Qin understood the key, so what he had to do next was to put his thoughts into practice. So, he closed his eyes again. This time, there were no more distracting thoughts in his mind. Understanding and breaking through are two different things. So, when Qin opened his eyes again, another 100 years had passed. A full 300 years. Qin had finally endured until this moment. Therefore, the moment he opened his eyes, The surging true essence suddenly surged out of his body, and then spread out in circles. But then, the true essence was like tentacles, and was all pulled back by Chen Shi. He was looking for the law threads left behind by the mysterious woman. When people walk through the snow, they would leave a trail of footprints on the snow. Although Chen Shi understood the true meaning of the word void, but because there was no spiritual energy in this place, he had not truly broken through to the Dongshu stage. Right now, he could not use his own strength to forcefully break through the void, so he needed to find the door of light that the woman opened for him. The snow melted. The door of light also disappeared. But the law threads that connected the two worlds still existed. Unless the woman personally destroyed it, this thread would forever exist between the two worlds. And this is the first law of heaven and earth that a cultivator must grasp, and also the biggest difference between the Dongshu stage and the ascended stage. One end is connected to the world, the other end is connected to the dark space. Chen Shi could only find this law thread at the moment, because he had once used this law thread to travel between the two worlds. Maybe, when he breaks through again in the future, he will suddenly realize, even in this empty dark space, there were countless densely packed law threads. Every single one of them led to a different place. Chen Shi still could not open a new law thread by himself, so he could only rely on the woman's power. He searched and searched and searched. Finally, he found it. To Chen Shi, this thread could not be any thinner. If he did not understand the true meaning of the word void, he would not be able to sense the existence of this thread in his life. Of course, the so-called thread was just a concept. It actually refers to a cultivator's understanding of the law of heaven and earth. This was the first time Chen Shi came into contact with the law of heaven and earth. Thus, the moment he discovered this law thread, he was so excited that he started to tremble. Chen Shi could no longer suppress his excitement, and immediately reached out to touch the thread. The moment his finger touched the law thread, a golden light shone. The spirit energy from the world kept pouring out from the golden light. A smile that had not appeared in a long time appeared on Chen Shi's face. After that, he did not stay any longer, and directly turned into a ray of light and entered the golden light. The world. I'm back. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, the mobile version of the book, .com. Chapter 435. Unlike the previous time, Chen Shi used his own ability to traverse through the two realms. After he flew out of the golden light, he naturally had a deeper understanding of the law threads. Chen Shi looked up and saw the same towering trees and lush vegetation on the floating island. The great sun-moon star array dispelled the darkness and brought light to the large world. Everything in front of him was the same as the last time he was here. There seemed to be no changes. But after Chen Shi looked around the floating island, he suddenly realized that the great sun-moon star array in the sky, which seemed to only be used for illumination, faintly contained strange patterns that even he could not understand. After realizing that something was wrong, Chen Shi was not in a hurry to find Yuhuan Tianzuan to settle the score. Instead, he sat cross-legged on the ground and looked up at the sky with a serious expression on his face as he observed. The last time he was here, he had not comprehended the true meaning of the word void, so he did not feel that there was anything special about this array. Now that he had comprehended the true meaning of the word void, and had even come into contact with the first law of heaven and earth, after careful observation, Chen Shi suddenly realized that these patterns were not the array patterns that maintained the operation of the array, but a law thread that he had never come into contact with before. The sun-moon star array rotated in unison. 9 stars flew in the sky, 9 palaces in the sky. Chen Shi looked at the bottom of the floating island thoughtfully. When he saw that the bottom of the floating island was still covered with stars, he suddenly had a guess. This array was not only used for illumination. That was because other than the many law threads above the floating island that guided the movement of the stars, there were also many law threads below the floating island that seemed to be there but not there. They were silent in the void, like a huge net hanging below the floating island group. If the 120,000 floating islands were considered as a whole, then this array was like 2 huge nets, firmly sandwiching the islands in between. One net had the sun-moon star array hanging on it, called Heaven's Net. The other net was deposited in the void, called Earth's Net. After understanding the mystery, Qinshi guessed, this formation might be the final trump card left by the grand pure divine ancestor for Tiandu. Once Tiandu faced a life and death crisis, the formation could instantly turn into a murderous formation and wipe out all enemies for Tiandu. Oh, it seems to be very powerful. After confirming the dangers of the Great Formation, Qinshi was still in no hurry to kill his way to Dragon Head Peak. Instead, he randomly grabbed an unlucky fellow on the floating island. Just like the last time, he had a time frame of reference this time, so he quickly found out from the mouth of this unlucky guy, it had only been a month since the battle on Dragon Head Peak. In other words, although Qinshi had been in the dark space for 300 years, only a month had passed in the great world. If the previous 200 years were to be included, then from the time he opened the gate of heaven until now, a total of less than 2 months had passed. If Tiandu time was converted to Earth time, it should be about 16 months. December of 1 year. 1 year and 1 April. Nian was already more than 6 years old. Without him and Ying to accompany her this year, he didn't know if this child's birthday was happy. Thinking of this, Qinshi's longing for her suddenly overflowed like the Yellow River, uncontrollable. So, he didn't delay any longer. After casually knocking that unlucky fellow unconscious and throwing him to the side, Qinshi directly sat cross-legged in the air. As he entered a meditative state, the spirit chi of heaven and earth within a radius of 1,000 miles suddenly surged toward him like a tsunami. Under Qinshi's intentional guidance, the spirit chi of heaven and earth suddenly gathered in one place, almost turning into an almost translucent, huge funnel visible to the naked eye. The violent surge of spirit chi set off a huge storm. The storm spread in all directions, instantly causing several large floating islands in the vicinity to tremble. Rumbling noises kept ringing out. The nearby floating islands seemed to have experienced an earthquake. Not only were the residents on the islands terrified, but even the birds and beasts on the islands were so frightened that they scattered and roared. The spirit chi funnel grew larger and larger, and in a short while, it covered all the floating islands within a radius of 100 miles. And the spirit chi on the floating islands covered by the funnel all rushed toward bicker. The direction of the bickering was exactly where Qinshi was. He was using his own strength, draining the dragon veins of hundreds of floating islands. When the spirit chi of heaven and earth entered the body, there should be a refining process. However, Qinshi was like a large factory at this moment. As long as the spirit chi entered his body, after a few assembly lines of processing, it would completely become a part of his body. The spirit chi surged faster and faster, and the accumulation of vital essence also increased. Qinshi didn't hide his aura at all, so his aura was rising at a speed visible to the naked eye. The early stage of the soul formation realm, the middle stage, the late stage, and then the peak stage. Under such crazy pressure, in just a few breaths' time, the accumulation of vital essence in Qinshi's body had already reached the peak. And as the funnel continued to expand, Qinshi's aura also became stronger and stronger. In the face of such a powerful aura, the residents on the nearest islands couldn't even stand steadily. At this moment, he didn't hide the killing intent in his heart. This killing intent seemed to have substance, and in the end, it turned into an invisible long sword. It soared into the sky and cut through the clouds. The sword pointed to the Dragon Head Peak. Bang! 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 Hundreds of dragon drums sounded at the same time, and the dense drum sounds poured down like a rainstorm. At that moment, even the god generals on duty on the various islands were stunned. But then, they were like cats whose tails had been stepped on, and they couldn't help but let out a long cry. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! Enemy attack! In an instant. Everyone was in a panic, and the sky shook. Yuan Tianzuan was discussing something with the celestial venerables in the Emperor Hall. When they suddenly heard the warning of the 5 divine generals, a trace of surprise flashed across the faces of the celestial venerables. Since they were called the celestial venerables of the 10 directions, there were naturally 10 celestial venerables in Tiandu. Qinshi was lucky last time and just happened to arrive at Dragon Head Peak when the other celestial venerables were patrolling, so he only met the three celestial venerables, Yu Huan, Miao Fa, and Xian Jin. But today was different, with Yu Huan Tianzuan as the leader. Yu Jiang, Tai Hua, Ying Hua, and the other celestial venerables were all present at this moment. Therefore, after hearing the divine general's warning, Yu Huan Tianzuan's face darkened on the spot. It must be him. He was lucky enough to escape last time, and now he dares to come back? Does he really think there's no one in Tiandu? Before he finished speaking, Yu Huan Tianzuan summoned the Jade Huan glazed cup, and then suddenly turned into a ray of light, rushing towards the direction of the dragon drum. Seeing this, the 7 celestial venerables who had not experienced the battle on Dragon Head Peak couldn't help but look at each other in dismay. Was there a need to be so excited? Chapter 436. Other than Yu Huan, Miao Fa, and Xian Zhen, the other celestial venerables had never personally fought with Qin Shi, so their understanding of Qin Shi came from the battle recordings on the Xian Tian mirror. The 7 celestial venerables were very knowledgeable, so it was not difficult to discover through the battle recordings. Although Qin Shi seemed ferocious at that time, using his own strength to forcefully deal with the siege of 3 Empyreans, during the fight, he had been in a passive state the entire time, basically without any extra strength to fight back. The 3 celestial venerables almost took away half of Qin Shi's life, not to mention the 10 celestial venerables present. Therefore, after seeing Yu Huan Tianzuan so excited, the 7 celestial venerables could not help but feel a little puzzled. Looking at Yu Huan's aggressive manner, could it be that he had some personal grudge with that person? The 7 celestial venerables each had their own thoughts. As they pondered over the key points, they followed Miao Fa and Xian Jin to the direction of the dragon drum. The 10 celestial venerables going out to meet the enemy was a grand occasion in divine capital. They did not say that they were not allowed to watch the battle, therefore, the spectators could no longer suppress the excitement in their hearts. As long as they could fly, they followed the footsteps of the 10 celestial venerables and rushed toward Qin Shi's location like a swarm of bees. For a moment, as long as the celestial venerables passed by the floating island, it was like a hornet's nest that was lit by a fire. In an instant, countless celestial venerables and above flew out. It had been a long time since the great world was so lively. Densely packed silhouettes continuously flew across the sky above the floating island like a swarm of locusts. The scene was even more shocking than the final battle in the movie Avatar. It had to be said that this troublemaker not only had a high cultivation, but also had courage that far surpassed ordinary people. As the saying goes, where there is life, there is hope. As long as one's cultivation reached the golden core stage and above, one's life was more important than anything else. The cultivation of immortal cultivators was not easy to come by, so how could they so easily give it up for nothing? What was the difference between Qin Shi's current actions and courting death? In order to fight back, he sacrificed his life for nothing. How unwise was such an action? Many people could not help but feel sorry for Qin Shi from the bottom of their hearts. However, even more people were filled with excitement, hoping to witness the fall of a heavenly venerate with their own eyes. With Yu Huan Tianzuan in the lead, the immortal cultivators of the great world quickly arrived at the periphery of the floating islands. The funnel that looked like a canopy of clouds had now turned into a gigantic cloud vortex, enveloping almost all of the floating islands within 1,000 miles. As the heaven and earth spirit chi continuously flowed into the center of the funnel, the floating island enveloped by the funnel gradually lost its vitality. At this very moment, the cloud vortex above the floating islands was like a ferocious beast from ancient times. Apart from sucking dry all the dragon veins on the floating islands, it also cast a huge psychological shadow on the islanders. This mysterious man who dared to make an enemy of Tiandu had yet to show himself, but the invisible pressure coming from his body weighed down on everyone's hearts like a huge rock. A sense of despair gradually spread through the crowd. It was only after Yu Huan Tianzuan's roar that this huge rock finally fell. Arrogant thief. There's a path to heaven, but you don't want to take it. There's no door to hell, but you insist on coming. Generals of Tiandu, listen to my order. Follow me and set up the soul-capturing formation. This time, we must not let him escape. Yu Huan Tianzuan took the lead and led the 5 divine generals into the cloud vortex like a sharp arrow. His appearance was like a ray of light in the darkness, instantly clearing away the haze in everyone's hearts. The islanders raised their heads to look, and they could not help but reveal an excited expression as if they had just escaped death. In the end, Yuhuan Tianzuan was their spiritual leader. Unlike last time, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not care about his face this time and forced himself to fight Chen Shi one-on-one. Instead, he assumed a group fighting stance. However, when he rushed into the clouds, he suddenly realized that Chen Shi's aura seemed to be much stronger than last time. Thinking of this, Yuhuan Tianzuan's face could not help but flash a trace of surprise, and a sense of uneasiness arose in his heart. However, when Miaofa and Xianjun arrived, this feeling of uneasiness was thrown out of his mind in the blink of an eye. He was just a defeated opponent. Could it be that he could pierce through the sky today? For safety reasons, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not recklessly rush in alone. He was afraid of falling into Chen Shi's ambush, so he immediately said to Miaofa and Xianzhen, "This person's behavior today is really strange. I'm afraid it's a trap. The two of you, follow me to find out what's going on." Hearing this, Miaofa and Xianzhen immediately nodded, then summoned their magic weapons and rushed into the depths of the clouds with Yuhuan Tianzuan side by side. At the same time, Chen Shi, who was in the center of the vortex, slowly opened his eyes. As soon as he opened his eyes, the vortex formed by the spiritual energy above him began to rotate rapidly, and then poured down on him at a speed visible to the naked eye. There was no grand and unique scene of a breakthrough. When the vital essence in Chen Shi's body accumulated to a certain level, he, who had mastered the true meaning of the word void, naturally broke through to the divine transformation stage, and then directly stepped into the Dongshu stage. The moment Chen Shi stepped into the Dongshu stage, a faint golden light suddenly lit up on his eyebrows. From afar, it was a bit like when Erlangshan opened his heavenly eye in the TV series. Then, this golden light gradually converged between Chen Shi's eyebrows, and then completely disappeared. This was the first law of heaven and earth that he had mastered, also known as the divine mark. Once the divine mark appeared, the Dongshu stage would appear. Chen Shi deliberately restrained his aura, so Yuhuan Tianzuan did not notice anything strange. When enemies meet, naturally, their eyes would be exceptionally red. Even though they were still far away, the two sides did not even say a word. As the saying goes, my brother Long is ruthless and doesn't talk much. The moment he saw Chen Shi, Yuhuan Tianzuan viciously threw the jade-glazed cup in his hand at him. It was still the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man. Seeing this, Chen Shi did not even condense the divine sword Dharma power. He directly formed a sword with his fingers, and then slashed at the three lanterns. It was still the first move of the moonlight sword technique. But after this sword slash, it instantly sucked away the little remaining spiritual chi in the surroundings, causing a strange vacuum to appear where the sword slash passed. This was the difference between the divine transformation stage and the Dongshu stage. If the divine transformation stage was compared to nitroglycerin, then the Dongshu stage was obviously nuclear fusion. There was a fundamental difference between the two. Therefore, the moment Chen Shi's sword slash hit the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man, an explosion that was beyond everyone's imagination occurred. With a loud boom, the three lanterns were sent flying back. The three heavenly lords who were closely related to the three lanterns seemed to have been severely injured, and a strange flush appeared on their faces. Please remember the domain name of this book, 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version website. Chapter 437. Above the floating islands. The huge cloud vortex obscured everyone's vision. They did not dare to approach the vortex, so they quietly floated around it. Looking up, the densely packed figures were like a swarm of locusts, almost covering half the sky. Just like the audience in the Colosseum in Rome, these descendants of ancient cultivators did not dare to make any noise, but there was still an inexplicable fanaticism in their eyes. Everyone wanted to witness the fall of a heavenly venerable with their own eyes. But no one expected that in addition to witnessing the fall of a heavenly venerable, they would also be fortunate enough to witness the birth of an ancient legend. With the arrival of the three heavenly venerables, Yuhuan, Miaofa, and Xianzhen, a gap was torn in the cloud vortex that covered the sky. The three heavenly venerables were like 3 sharp arrows with tricolored divine flames on them as they shot straight at the enemy in the depths of the vortex. For a moment, the golden myriad spirit ancient the purple sky incinerating purple flame, and the grayish-green netherworld ghost flame all bloomed with their own unique brilliance. The three flames intertwined and rose, burning fiercely, almost instantly burning away a large portion of the cloud vortex. At the same time, it also cleared the vision of the spectators. And it was precisely because of this clear vision that everyone witnessed what happened next with their own eyes. After the green sword light and the tricolored divine flame collided in the air, it was like a sharp sword piercing through a glass window. It strangely felt like a mirror shattering in the void. Boom! Following a huge explosion, a formless shockwave spread out. Wherever the shockwave went, spiritual energy surged and wreaked havoc. The spectators closer to the center of the battlefield felt as if their chests had been hit by a battering ram. They were actually sent flying by this invisible force just like that. All of you, back off. Back off at least 5 kilometers. Divine generals of 5 directions, listen up. No one is allowed to come near this place. Fortunately, there were not only 3 heavenly venerables present today. The 7 heavenly venerables, including Yujiang, Taihua, and Ninghua, who had arrived later, saw the intensity of the battle and simultaneously pulled up a protective barrier around the periphery, saving many people in time. Although it was only the first move, the intensity of this battle was far greater than the battle on Dragon Head Peak. Feeling the powerful true essence fluctuations, the 7 celestial venerables' faces suddenly flashed with a trace of surprise. It was no wonder that Yu Huan would put on such a solemn expression. If it was a one-on-one battle, it was likely that none of the 10 Empyreans present were his match. In a battle between experts, one move was enough to determine the truth. The 7 celestial venerables merely watched the battle from afar and did not personally step forward to fight with Qin Shi, so their feelings were naturally not as vivid as those of the 3 celestial venerables present. Qin Shi's seemingly casual slash, other than forcing the heaven, earth, and man lanterns to retreat, he had also directly injured the 3 celestial venerables who were related to the lives of the 3 lanterns. How could Yu Huan Tianzuan not be shocked? It wasn't like he hadn't fought with Qin Shi before. When he fought Qin Shi, who was at the peak of the soul formation stage, he didn't have the upper hand, but it wasn't as if he had no chance of winning. But now, Qin Shi was fighting against 3 celestial venerables alone, but he could still easily injure them? How was this possible? At this moment, not only was Yu Huan Tianzuan shocked, but even the 2 celestial venerables, Miao Fa and Xian Zhen, were filled with shock and uncertainty. The 3 of them hesitated, and the scene temporarily returned to its original calm. Seeing this, Qin Shi wasn't in a hurry. Instead, he slowly flew up until he was at the same height as the 3 celestial venerables. Only then did he speak loudly to everyone present. This humble one is Qin Shi. I've already met all of you before, so I don't think I need to introduce myself too much, right? Actually, I've always wanted to sit down and talk with all of you, but you didn't even give me a chance to speak. I originally had no intention of making an enemy out of Tiandu. I just wanted to borrow the sky-bearing impersonation technique and use the floating dawn mirror. If all of you are reasonable, you should understand that you shouldn't make an enemy out of me for no reason. At this point, Qin Shi suddenly paused. Then, he looked at Yu Huan Tianzuan and said calmly, also, I want to clarify that, I didn't kill Wushu. After hearing this, a trace of doubt flashed across Yu Huan Tianzuan's face. He frowned and seemed to want to say something, but then he heard Qin Shi continue. So what I want to say now is, if all of you are willing to talk, then I can give all of you another chance. Let's turn weapons of war into gifts of jade and silk, so as to avoid increasing the sin of killing. If not, everyone, please don't blame my sword for being merciless. Although Qin Shi wasn't an unforgiving evil person, he wasn't a good person with a gentle temperament either. If the mysterious woman hadn't saved him, he would have died with hatred in his heart. Therefore, although his words seemed reasonable, in reality, he didn't leave any face for the 10 celestial venerables. This was deliberately embarrassing for Tiandu. Of course, if the other party honestly lowered their heads and admitted their mistakes, Qin Shi could indeed consider letting them live. But, with the lofty status of the 10 celestial venerables, how could they easily lower their heads to others? What? Don't we, the 10 celestial venerables, need face? If they really agreed to Qin Shi's request today, then how would the 10 of them face the generals of Tiandu in the future? How would they continue to rule the outside world with the face? From the beginning, Qin Shi had already calculated the thoughts of the 10 celestial venerables. The reason why he wasted his breath was actually just to give himself a good reason to make a move so that he could be more decisive when he took action later. Speaking of which, Qin Shi was really a little mischievous, as expected. It would have been better if he hadn't said those words. After saying that, the 10 celestial venerables' expressions changed greatly. Among them, Celestial Venerable Sun Blaze, who had the most fiery temper, was so angry that he directly summoned his natal magic treasure, Heaven-Splitting Axe. After that, Celestial Venerable Sun Blaze ignored Celestial Venerable Yu Zhang's obstruction and rushed toward Qin Shi with his giant axe. Little thief, don't be so arrogant. Yu Huan, you guys watch on the sidelines for now. Let me deal with him alone. Yu Huan, Miaofa, and Xianjun couldn't gain any advantage over Qin Shi, but Celestial Venerable Sun Blaze didn't believe it. He raised his giant axe and fiercely chopped at Qin Shi. Axes were different from swords. They were designed to be heavy and powerful, and must kill in one hit. Therefore, as Celestial Venerable Sun Blaze chopped down with his axe, a strong wind immediately blew in the air. In terms of power, it was even more ferocious than the 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man. This kind of fighting style that only focused on killing and disregarded defense was actually very rare among immortal cultivators. Celestial Venerable Sun Blaze relied on the indomitable fierceness in his bones to fight for the position of Celestial Venerable. Therefore, even if his cultivation wasn't at the top of the 10 Celestial Venerables, not many people dared to casually fight with him. He was a living brute. But today, this brute met an opponent who was even more reckless than him. Come on. Seeing that the giant axe was about to arrive, Qin Shi's face suddenly flashed with a trace of excitement. He made a grabbing motion with his left hand, and a saber-like materialization weapon condensed in his hand. Then, Qin Shi held the saber in his hand and directly faced the giant axe. Using strength to overcome strength. Using force to meet force. He wanted to take this opportunity to gauge the absolute power that he now possessed. Chapter 438. Just as Celestial Master Blazing Sun was wielding his heaven-splitting axe and using all his strength to execute the 36 moves of the Heavenly Dipper axe technique, Qin Shi's mood could be accurately described with one idiom, and that was, elation at the sight of a prey. Different cultivation methods would naturally lead to different combat habits for immortal cultivators. Based on Qin Shi's previous combat style, when faced with such a ferocious cultivation technique, Qin Shi would definitely not meet it head-on. Instead, he would constantly twist and turn and restrain his opponent until he found a flaw in his opponent's aura. Only then would he decisively strike with his sword, hoping to achieve the desired result in one strike. The axe technique was ferocious, while the sword technique was nimble. Each of the 18 types of martial arts had their own unique characteristics. It was not easy to judge which one was better and which one was worse. It was also because of the characteristics of the axe technique that Celestial Master Blazing Sun's move was not necessarily exquisite. However, it was definitely incomparably violent. Even if Yu Huan and the others joined forces, they did not dare to meet it head-on. Of course, just because Yu Huan and the others did not dare to meet it head-on did not mean that Qin Shi did not dare to meet it head-on. This was his first battle after stepping into the insightful emptiness realm, so he naturally treated this battle as a testing ground for his sword. Therefore, Qin Shi abandoned the sword technique he was most proficient in and instead used the Red Sun Saber technique, which he had not used often before. He was prepared to meet Celestial Master Blazing Sun's axe head-on, hoping to see how much progress he had made. Therefore, the moment he raised his hand and swung his saber, Saber Chi was born, instantly cutting through the void and soaring into the sky. At the same time, the area within a radius of several hundred feet was shrouded in Saber Chi, as if it wanted to destroy everything within range. It was impossible to dodge and was at the mercy of others. And this was the third move of the Red Sun Saber technique. One saber cleaves the sky, one with the saber. Great clumsiness turned into simplicity, one saber was enough. As the heaven-splitting axe came crashing down, a bright saber light with a hint of coldness shot out from the tip of the saber. Then, with an incomparably violent and domineering aura, it slashed directly at the incoming celestial master blazing Sunday. At this moment, almost all the spectators, including the 10 celestial masters, could not help but hold their breaths, for fear of missing any exciting scenes. However, what happened next disappointed them. For some unknown reason, the moment the tip of the saber touched the edge of the axe, the giant axe formed from celestial venerate sun blazes true yuan chi melted like snow under the blazing sun and slowly dissipated into the void. This feeling was very strange. It was as if one side was holding a tempered steel knife, while the other side was holding an axe carved out of ice. Therefore, as soon as the two came into contact, the axe shattered into countless ice shards. Sigh, seeing this, Qin Shi sighed silently. In the end, he still couldn't hold it in. After all, how could he, who had already grasped the laws of heaven and earth, be like before, only rely on the enormous amount of true essence to fight? If that was the case, wouldn't a Dongshu stage Xiaoxianist become a brute with nothing but brute strength? In fact, the moment Heavenly Venerate Sunblaze swung his axe, Qin Shi saw numerous law threads on his body. Therefore, he only needed to cut off one of them to easily neutralize Heavenly Sovereign Sunblaze's attack. Until this moment, Qin Shi finally understood the gap between the Divine Transformation stage and the Dongshu stage. True Yuan was no longer the only standard to measure one's strength. Understanding and grasping the laws of heaven and earth was the direction he needed to study in the future. The more laws he grasped, the closer he was to the Great Tao. So, unknowingly, he had already reached this step. Thinking of this, Qin Shi's excitement from his breakthrough immediately calmed down. When he turned his head to look at Yuhuan Tianzuan and the others again, there was only a pale feeling left in his heart. That was, dull and uninteresting. So what if they were Tiandu? So what if they had more people? They were no longer on the same level. The reason was simple. It was like an adult fighting kindergarten children. Even if there were 100 children standing opposite him, he wouldn't feel any pleasure after destroying them. Punch at the Nanshan nursing home, kick at the Beihai kindergarten. This was just a joke. Perhaps this was the after effect of advancing to the next level. At this moment, in Qin Shi's eyes, this great world that carried all the hopes of the ancient cultivators was no different from the Beihai kindergarten. He silently looked around the room. Wherever he looked, the other party would reveal a nervous and somewhat flustered expression. It was just a casual slash. Heavenly Sovereign Sunblaze, who was known for his martial prowess in the divine capital, was seriously injured. Now, he had been brought back to the Dragon Head Peak by the divine generals to heal. Seeing this, the remaining 9 heavenly sovereigns immediately took out their life magic treasures as if they were facing a great enemy. They were prepared for any possible attacks from Qin Shi. For a moment, there was a strange silence. When Qin Shi saw their laughable expressions, he couldn't help but think of the mysterious woman in the dark space. Perhaps in the eyes of that mysterious woman, he should be as insignificant and laughable as these people in front of him, right? The Great Tao was endless. There was always a mountain higher than another. If he didn't jump into this small pond, he would never know how high the sky was and how wide the earth was. Thinking of the realm that the mysterious woman might reach, even Qin Shi couldn't help but yearn for it. However, yearning was yearning, reality was reality. The reality was, Yingying was still waiting for him to save her. Nian was still waiting for him to go home. What were they waiting for? Therefore, after seeing the remaining 9 heavenly sovereigns take out their life magic treasures, Qin Shi couldn't help but smile at them and say, "All of you come together, I'm in a hurry." As soon as his voice fell, a divine sword appeared in his right hand. Then, Qin Shi held a sword in one hand and a saber in the other and took the initiative to rush toward the 10 heavenly sovereigns in front of him. Don't be afraid. Everyone, attack together. This old man really doesn't believe that he can overturn the heavens. Yuhuan Tianzuan was also a ruthless person. Although he didn't understand why Qin Shi was able to defeat Heavenly Sovereign Yang Yan in one move, he didn't have any intention of retreating. Instead, when he saw Qin Shi make a move, he took the lead to face him. It was still the same 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man combined attack. But this time, they were not facing Qin Shi, who was at the peak of the semi-god realm. It was Qin Shi, who was at the early stage of the void transformation realm and already had killing intent in his heart. I've already given you a chance, it's you who didn't cherish it, then don't blame me for being ruthless. After saying that, Qin Shi couldn't help but let out a long roar towards the sky, and the sword in his hand suddenly glowed with a faint cold light. The third move of the combination of sword and saber. The saber was formless, the sword was formless, and the vast expanse of heaven and earth could be shattered. Chapter 439. 3 styles of saber, 3 styles of sword. 3 styles of saber and sword. 3 styles of endless, 9 styles of returning to one. As soon as he finished speaking, Qin Shi held the sword in his right hand and the saber in his left. With a shocking momentum, he charged toward the 10 celestial sages not far away. At this moment, one of the 10 celestial sages was injured. Although the remaining 9 were a little worried about the strength that Qin Shi had shown before, after being provoked by Qin Shi again and again, the 9 celestial sages were obviously completely provoked. Evil thief, don't be so arrogant. This is the hinterland of Tiandu, under the shadow of the divine ancestor. How can you be so presumptuous? Everyone, let's take him down together. By Su Qingtian's order. As Yuan Tianzuan's words fell, the 9 of them no longer cared about their identity and almost simultaneously took out their famous natal magic treasures. As various magic treasures flew out of their hands, the field suddenly shone brilliantly, showing the mighty divine power. Seeing that the battle was about to start, even the 5 divine generals, whose strength was second only to the celestial sages, retreated 10 miles away at this moment, not daring to take half a step forward. After all, this was a battle of the celestial sages. It was also the first time that the 10 celestial sages had joined forces to deal with one person. Therefore, no matter the result, today's battle was enough to be called unprecedentedly brilliant. Perhaps it was to make this battle more legendary. The moment Qin Shi raised the saber and sword in his hand, even time seemed to stop flowing, and everything in the void was silent. The third style of the divine skill, combination of saber and sword, the saber is formless, the sword is formless, the vast expanse shatters heaven and earth. When he was still in the heavenly jade world, Qin Shi had already used this move. However, at that time, he had not comprehended the true meaning of the word void, so he could only force the move with a huge amount of vital essence. At this moment, Qin Shi finally stepped into the insightful void realm. Therefore, when he used this move again, he suddenly had a different feeling in his heart. It turned out that this move actually involved the application of the laws of heaven and earth, and could only be smoothly used by those above the insightful void realm. The saber is formless, the sword is formless. Its purpose was to shatter heaven and earth. Qin Shi swung the sword and saber in his hand, and endless saber and sword chi burst out in the void. Aura fluctuations could not be concealed, so the celestial venerables immediately felt that there seemed to be thousands of swords slowly forming in front of him. However, when they focused their gazes, they did not find anything strange. That was because this move had chi but was formless. It was exactly the same as that sentence. The blade was formless, and the sword was formless. The chi of the saber and sword, which contained the essence of the word void, was like a huge net in the void, suddenly covering the 9 celestial venerables. The 9 celestial venerables did not notice anything strange. Only when the net of chi from the saber and sword came crashing down did everyone realize that they had fallen into Qin Shi's trap. There was almost no warning. It was as if they had stepped into a void, and there was no end to their surroundings. Yuan Tianzuan tried to struggle, but found that he couldn't. It was as if he was trapped by something invisible. This? Seeing this, Yuan Tianzuan couldn't help but widen his eyes slightly. He quickly mobilized all the true qi in his body, trying to forcibly break free from the shackles. However, at this moment, his body suddenly felt pain, and countless bloody marks suddenly burst out all over his body. As if falling into a red dye vat, the 9 celestial venerables' clothes were instantly soaked with blood. Even with the protection of treasures, it was difficult for them to withstand the power of this move. Because this move was simply unpredictable and impossible to dodge. It was hidden in the void. If one did not comprehend the essence of the word void, it was basically impossible to detect it. And this was the terrifying part of the third divine skill. Turning nothingness into something, the world was filled with saber and sword chi, formless and formless. At this moment, it was a flower. At that moment, it was a bird. At the next moment, it was a scorching sun in the sky. From the perspective of a bystander, it was as if nothing had happened. However, the 9 celestial venerables' bodies were oozing blood very strangely. Just as everyone was feeling a little puzzled, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly looked up to the sky and let out a fierce howl. Then, he gritted his teeth and ignited a drop of blood essence in his body. One had to admit that this old man did have some eyesight. Once he saw that the situation was not right, he actually directly put on a desperate posture. At the price of burning his blood essence, he forcefully tore a gap in Chen Shi's saber and sword chi net. After escaping, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not waste any time. He directly recalled the Jade World glazed cup and then used the ancient spirit Yi to save the few celestial venerables beside him. Yuhuan, you? Looking at Yuhuan Tianzuan, who was covered in blood chi, a trace of shock appeared on Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell's face. Hearing that, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not immediately reply. Instead, he looked at Chen Shi with eyes full of resentment. This person is not the same as before. He must have had some fortuitous encounter and stepped into the legendary supreme stage. This sentence was like a bucket of cold water poured over their heads, instantly extinguishing the burning battle intent in their hearts. Supreme stage. That was an existence that surpassed Empyreans. Ever since the grand pure saint ancestor passed away, the strength of the great world had begun to decline. It had been a long time since a supreme stage existence had appeared. Thinking of this, everyone couldn't help but look at each other. However, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not give them too much time to think. Instead, he continued, this person is not from our Tiandu. He is an external enemy. If we avoid him, how will we have the face to worship the sacred ancestor in the future? Tiandu's 10,000 years of inheritance, the sacred ancestor's illustrious name, is it going to be destroyed in our hands today? This old man is unwilling, and also unwilling. Only because, I am one of the 10 Empyreans of Tiandu. These words were so beautiful that it was as if the 8 Empyreans present had been injected with chicken blood. Their faces immediately surged with boundless pride. That's right. So what if you're a sovereign? Since we are the 10 Empyreans of Tiandu, how can we easily lower our heads to others? This seemingly long and tedious conversation actually happened in the blink of an eye. Therefore, just as Chen Shi was about to deliver the final blow, the remaining 8 Empyreans actually ignited the blood essence in their bodies. In an instant, the true essence fluctuations caused by the 9 Empyreans burning their blood essence were like the setting sun dyeing a large area of the sky red. Seeing this, Chen Shi couldn't help but flash a trace of admiration on his face. Immortal cultivators couldn't lose their courage. He didn't expect that the 10 Empyreans had been in high positions for so many years, but the sword in their hearts hadn't rusted because of this. His opponent was so valiant, how could he fall behind? Therefore, this time, Chen Shi didn't think of avoiding the spearhead at all. Instead, he immediately brandished his sword to meet it. At this point, the result of this battle was destined to be a fight to the death. Then, the 10 Empyreans united and displayed all that they had learned in their lives. They charged towards the legendary supreme stage in their strongest state. And Chen Shi displayed the elegance of the void stage. With his own strength, he fought 9 soul formation stage cultivators who were burning their blood essence and risking their lives. This battle was unprecedentedly bright. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 440. As the battle gradually reached its climax, earth-shattering explosions rang out one after another. The multicolored True Yuan was like an aurora, slowly flowing in the air above the floating island. As long as the true essence energy came into contact with Chen Shi's saber and sword chi net, it would explode with a blinding light. The scene was like magnesium powder meeting fire. Shockwaves would always follow the explosion. Wave after wave of shockwaves crashed into the nearby floating islands, causing the islands below to tremble violently. If not for the fact that both sides were virtuous enough to subconsciously carve out a few moves before making a move, countless floating islands would have already been smashed to pieces. This was a battle between heavenly venerables. Although it looked like a dazzling battle, it actually contained countless murderous intents. Thus, even from 5 kilometers away, the spectators could still feel an extremely powerful murderous intent. No one dared to take a step forward. As long as they came into contact with the saber and sword Chinet or the rainbow divine light, they would definitely be shredded into pieces. Almost everyone's hearts tightened, including the 10 heavenly venerables. Because there was a time limit to burning blood essence. Not only did Chen-Shi know this, but even the 9 heavenly venerables knew this very well. Time was of the essence, so the 9 of them wanted to use all their strength to defeat Chen-Shi in one fell swoop before the blood essence was completely burned. But how could Chen-Shi let them do as they wished so easily? Perhaps it was because Heavenly Venerable Sun Blaze was absent, but the 10 Directions Immortal Extermination formation that the 9 Heavenly Venerables had set up was clearly lacking in maturity. After grasping the true meaning of the word void, Chen-Shi could always immediately discover the flaws in the 9 Heavenly Venerables' joint attacks even if he didn't deliberately pay attention to them. Thus, the 9 Heavenly Venerables' joint attacks were always easily resolved by Chen-Shi. The 9 of them working together still couldn't hurt Chen-Shi. Once the blood essence was completely burned, what would they use to deal with him? At this thought, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately became impatient. Even the frequency of his attacks became more and more hurried. However, being impatient wouldn't help at all. Instead, it would only expose his shortcomings even more quickly. After the two sides had exchanged more than 1,000 moves, Chen-Shi deliberately revealed a flaw and pretended to be pinned down by Empyrean Yujiang. At the same time, he deliberately exposed his back to Empyrean Yuhuan. Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan fell for it. The old man felt that the opportunity was not to be missed, so he directly broke out of the formation and viciously smashed the glass cup at Chen-Shi's back. As the Jade Universe glazed cup flew out of his hand, the 10 Directions Immortal Slaying formation, which had been greatly weakened due to Celestial Venerable Sunblaze's absence, immediately fell apart. At this time, Chen-Shi seemed to have expected this. He suddenly forced Wondrous Spell Heavenly Lord back with a slash of his saber. Then, he decisively pulled back his sword, allowing the sword that had been accumulating power for a long time to point directly at Yuhuan Tianzuan. Yuhuan Tianzuan only saw a cold light flash before his eyes. He didn't even have time to defend himself before the sword pierced through his protective aura and through his body, drawing a long line of blood in the air. Pooh! After suffering such a heavy blow, Yuhuan Tianzuan lost his ability to fight on the spot and instantly fell from the sky. If Heavenly Lord Yinghua hadn't reacted quickly and caught him in time, Yuhuan Tianzuan would have fallen directly into the endless void below. The formation has been broken. We are in danger. Everyone, quickly retreat to the Imperial Hall and regroup. We will wait for an opportunity. Go quickly. I will stop him. Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell was indeed somewhat courageous. Seeing that the 10 Directions Immortal Slaying formation had collapsed due to Yuhuan Tianzuan's injuries, he advanced instead of retreating. He held the 8 Views Palace lantern and brazenly faced Chen-Shi. However, Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell, who was only at the early stage of soul formation, couldn't block Chen-Shi, who was at the early stage of void transformation, even if he burned his blood essence. Thus, in the instant that the other 7 people turned around and flew away with Yuhuan Tianzuan, Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell, who was covering for them, was struck by Chen-Shi's sword. As a result, he fell from the sky and heavily smashed into the floating island below. 1,000-mile journey collapsed because of an ant's nest. Because of Yuhuan Tianzuan's momentary mistake, the 10 Directions Celestial Lords were instantly defeated. In gaming terms, that would be, the configuration of their formation was too low, and the margin for error was almost zero. A single mistake would instantly cause them to be wiped out. After Chen-Shi defeated Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell, he didn't rush to finish him off. Instead, he immediately chased after the 8 fleeing celestial lords. Seeing this, Heavenly Lord Yujiang, who was the strongest among them, decisively stepped forward and replaced Heavenly Lord Wondrous spell to cover for everyone. However, Qin was like a madman who had gone berserk. As soon as the two of them met, Heavenly Lord Yujiang was slashed down by his sword and fell straight into the void below. Wondrous spell and Yujiang fell one after another. Even if they excluded the heavily injured Yu Huan, there were still 6 people left. Thus, Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen stepped forward. They couldn't delay for too long, but this method of covering the rear greatly lengthened the battle line. As a result, after Qin repelled Xuanzhen with his sword, Dragon Head Peak appeared not far in front of them. At this moment, Qin didn't need to think with his but to know. They were going to activate the Great Sun Moonstar Formation. Since this formation was the final killing move that the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor had left behind for Tian Capital, it must have its unique features. Qin didn't think that he was a match for the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, so he deliberately lured everyone to the periphery of the floating islands. His goal was to make the 10 Heavenly Venerables stay away from the Imperial Polarity Hall and prevent them from activating the formation at any time. Qin had achieved his goal. However, he still didn't expect the 10 Heavenly Venerables, who held high positions, would have the courage to burn their blood essence and sacrifice themselves at the same time. Xuanzhen fell. Yinghua stepped forward again. The Heavenly Venerables, who used to be high and mighty, fell one after another, but the remaining few stood up resolutely and continued to cover the rear for their companions. Although they couldn't block 1 or 2 moves from Qin, they could create some obstacles for Qin and buy some time for everyone to escape. When only 3 Heavenly Venerables were left beside Yu Huan, the group of 4 finally flew to Dragon Head Peak. For Tian Capital, for the Divine Ancestor's reputation. Go, Yu Huan. We'll do our best to buy time for you. A fierce look flashed across the Taihua Heavenly Venerable's face. Then, he and the other 2 Heavenly Venerables turned to face Qin, who was chasing after them with a sword. Seeing this, Qin couldn't help but yell fiercely, "Get lost!" The battle was coming to an end. As long as the 3 people in front of him were defeated, Tian Capital would have no chance of counterattacking. Therefore, Qin no longer held back and decisively used his killing move. The saber was formless, the sword was formless, and the vast expanse could shatter the universe. The sound came with the sword, its momentum unparalleled. The 3 Heavenly Venerables with the lowest cultivation didn't even have time to scream before they were completely pulverized by the billions of saber lights and sword shadows. However, it was also because they risked their lives to stop Yu Huan Tianzun successfully flew to the front of the Imperial Polarity Hall. As soon as he landed, Yu Huan Tianzun suddenly let out a long howl and slammed his palm into the center of the square. In an instant, the entire floating island trembled violently. Feeling the tremors from Dragon Head Peak, Yu Huan Tianzun couldn't help but tremble with excitement. After tens of thousands of years of silence, the array pattern that the Divine Ancestor personally engraved on the square finally showed its brilliance to the world. Divine Ancestor above. The Emperor's majestic North Tower, the Divine Ancestor's vast kindness shakes the southern sky. Fortunately, we did not disappoint you. Chapter 441. I wish everyone a happy new year. I'm sure you'll be rich this year. It's New Year's Day, so all my relatives and friends will come over to play. I'm busy cooking at home, so I really can't write. I hope everyone can bear with me in the new year. I'll remember to update it. I'll update it at night and in the morning. I'm so moral happy new year, returning from cultivation to become a stay-at-home dad. Please wait a moment. After the content is updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Chapter 442. As Yu Huan Tianzun slammed his palm down, the formation runes engraved on the plaza began to glow. Just as Qin had expected, this formation was indeed the final killing move left behind by the Pure Sky Saint Ancestor for Tiandu. Ever since the Pure Sky Saint Ancestor led the ancient cultivators to build Tiandu, this formation had been engraved on Dragon Head Peak. But what was strange was that the ancient books left behind by the Pure Sky Saint Ancestor did not record any description of this formation, so no one knew what this formation was used for. Perhaps it was an illusion formation, perhaps it was a killing formation. In short, it should not be activated unless it was absolutely necessary. Speaking of which, it was important to mention something important. It was not that Shi did not want to stop the formation from activating, but that he could not stop it at all. Unless he could kill the 10 celestial venerables in one move, the 10 celestial venerables would activate the formation at the most dangerous moment. This was a paradox in itself. After all, the formation carried Tiandu's last hope and was also the foundation of Tiandu's standing in the great world. Just like playing cards, when Yuhuan Tianzuan lost everything, he would naturally place his hopes on this trump card. And now, it was time to reveal this trump card. It had to be said that this trump card was indeed somewhat extraordinary. As the formation runes on the plaza appeared one after another, the great sun-moon star formation above the floating islands suddenly dimmed a lot, and the entire great world fell into darkness. Seeing this, Shi could not help but be on guard and carefully analyze the changes in order to find the location of the formation's life gate as soon as possible. Whether it was an illusion formation or a killing formation, there would usually be 2 life and death gates when setting it up. On one hand, it was to prevent the formation from covering their allies, and on the other hand, it was convenient for the person setting up the formation to enter and exit the formation. But what made Shi feel a little strange was, the formation in front of him did not seem to have 2 life and death gates. As soon as the formation was activated, one after another, flickering lines of law slowly appeared in the void. Even if Yuhuan Tianzuan had not grasped the true meaning of the word void, he could still see these lines of law with his naked eye. Of course, in Yuhuan Tianzuan's eyes, these lines of law were just waves of vital essence. The lines of law crisscrossed in the void. From afar, it looked like a large net covering the entire great world. Then, these lines of law tightened, and the 120,000 floating islands became fish and shrimps in the net. At the same time, the soul mirror stored in the Imperial Hall suddenly released a dazzling golden light, and flew to the center of the plaza with a whoosh. The formation runes in the center was a circular shape, with a circular hole in the middle. After the soul mirror flew, it directly landed on the circular hole. Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan stared blankly at everything before him. Although the formation to Tianzuan was it to the sky, to it to was. However, just as he was absent-minded, the soul mirror actually automatically combined with the formation patterns. Immediately after, an extremely intense true essence fluctuation erupted, and actually blasted Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan flying far away all of a sudden. Something unexpected happened. The great world. The 120,000 floating islands began to shake violently under the influence of an unknown force. The spirit energy on the floating islands originated from the dragon veins on the various islands, but now, these dragon veins were like a volcanic eruption, gushing out and gathering at the peak of Dragon Head Peak. The spirit energy surged crazily in one place, and for a moment, it caused an unprecedented spirit energy tide in the great world. Seeing this, Shi no longer cared about snatching the soul mirror, and turned to leave the center of the storm that had yet to form. But what he didn't expect was, even though he had already stepped into the insightful emptiness realm, he was still like a 3-year-old child in front of the Grand Pure One's laws. He couldn't use brute force to tear open this gradually tightening net. The inescapable net formed by the lines of law tightened, and the 120,000 floating islands gathered in one place. The floating islands in the center were still fine, as there was still some space between them, so no collisions occurred. But the floating islands at the edge were in trouble. Many of the floating islands were pushed by the net, and they collided with the nearest floating islands. The scene was so tragic that it was like a serial car accident on the highway. In an instant, mountains collapsed, the earth cracked, and rocks flew. The residents on the islands were howling in grief. After seeing the tragic situation at the periphery of the floating islands, Yuhuan Tianzuan felt a chill run down his back, and his heart was filled with inexplicable fear. He would never have thought, the formation left behind by the Grand Pure One was not to defend against enemies, but to destroy Heaven Capital's foundation. Grand Pure One, could this be the last hope you left for Heaven Capital? Hope. Ha 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 ha, seeing the floating islands in the distance continuously colliding and sinking, Yuan Tianzuan was filled with despair. He wanted to use this opportunity to turn the tables, but who would have thought the result would be like this? After receiving such a blow, Yuan Tianzuan suddenly seemed to have gone crazy, and he couldn't help but sit at the edge of the square and laugh wildly. Unlike Yuan Tianzuan's despair, Qin Shi seemed to have realized the crux of the matter. Thus, he immediately turned and rushed toward the soul mirror in the center of the square, and at the same time, he slashed out with his sword in an attempt to destroy it. Qin Shi had used 10% of his strength in this attack. But after he slashed out, the soul mirror embedded in the center of the square was like a black hole, and it almost instantly swallowed up the sword light. Even a stone thrown into the water would cause a splash, but Qin Shi's sword light did not even cause a ripple. Seeing this, Qin Shi did not panic. Instead, he continued to slash at the soul mirror, trying to forcibly stop the formation's operation. But no matter how many times he slashed, the result was the same. As soon as the sword light approached the soul mirror, it seemed to be affected by something and was directly swallowed up by the soul mirror. It did not even cause the slightest movement, and it disappeared without a trace. And just as Qin Shi was thinking about how to destroy the formation patterns in the square suddenly emitted a faint energy fluctuation like an energy cannon that had been fully charged. Qin Shi sensed that something was wrong. Just as he was about to take a closer look, the soul mirror in the center of the square suddenly emitted a blinding light. The light was so strong that it was not inferior to the sun. Qin Shi subconsciously blinked. But at this moment, an extremely strong gravitational force suddenly came from where the soul mirror was. Qin Shi was caught off guard and was directly pulled to the ground by this gravitational force. At the same time, all the floating islands that were enveloped by the light were like space stations that had lost control and were rapidly flying toward the center of the light. Chapter 443. A beam of light suddenly shot out from Dragon Head Peak, followed by an extremely powerful gravitational force. This gravitational force was so strong that it could even drag Qin Shi down from the sky, let alone other objects in the great world. No one or object could resist this powerful gravitational force. It seemed to have combined all the spiritual energy in the great world. The moment the light appeared, it pulled all 120,000 floating islands to the vicinity of Dragon Head Peak. The scene was so spectacular that it could be described as hundreds of barges and thousands of sails competing. One after another, the floating islands collided in the void. Each collision would set off an earth-shattering boom, accompanied by the cries and wails of countless living beings. Many of the weaker cultivators were turned into dust on the spot in the collision. Even those with higher cultivation, such as the 5 divine generals, could not escape the pull of the strong light even though they could successfully avoid the collision of the peaks. This scene was very similar to a flush toilet. One only needed to gently press the switch, and all the filth and turbidity in the world would rush into the sewer along with the rapid flow of water. Yuan Tianzuan, who was closest to the strong light, was the first to disappear. He did not even have the time to scream before he was sucked away by the strong light in the blink of an eye. Immediately after, the Imperial Extreme Hall also turned into thousands of dust and debris and disappeared into the strong light. Then, the flowers, trees, sand, and stones on Dragon Head Peak, whether it was birds, beasts, divine generals, or star lords, as long as they were enveloped by the strong light, they would be instantly sucked in and completely disappear. This strong light was like a white hole, crazily devouring everything in the great world. After swallowing Dragon Head Peak, it began to devour the surrounding floating islands as if it would never be full. Qin Shi bitterly resisted the strong gravitational force brought about by the strong light. He looked back at the square and found that it had completely turned into a white sphere of light. The strong light came from the central region of this sphere of light, and there was a strange black region at the edge of the sphere that looked like a ribbon in the void. In any case, Qin Shi was someone who had seen big scenes. Therefore, after seeing such a scene, a term immediately popped up in his mind: a white hole. One must know that in the vast universe, in addition to the black hole that could even swallow light, there was also an existence with a completely opposite nature. This was the white hole. To put it simply, if the black hole was the entrance to a certain space, then the white hole would be the exit of this space. The black hole was responsible for swallowing, while the white hole was responsible for spitting. Once the Grand Pure Saint Ancestor's Sun-Moon Star formation was activated, all the objects in the large world would be gradually wrapped up in an inescapable net and stuffed into a white hole. Then, through the white hole, these objects would be sent to another unknown world. Qin didn't want to be sent to some strange place again. Therefore, when he realized the true function of the formation, he used all his strength and began to struggle madly. In any case, he was at the Dongshu stage. Thus, his efforts played a certain role in the end. As a result, he was able to successfully go against the current and arrive at the border of the heavenly network. The heavenly network was formed by the threads of law. Qin tried to touch it, but realized that these laws weren't something he could control at his current stage. Therefore, he immediately took out the sword in his hand and tried to tear this large net apart with brute force. However, no matter how hard he tried, the large net didn't budge. And as the inescapable net tightened, by the time most of the 120,000 floating islands had been swallowed up, Qin was like a fish in a net. She could only watch in despair as she was continuously dragged towards the white hole by the large net, F***ck. After some time, when Qin regained consciousness, he realized that he was in an unfamiliar vacuum environment. This vacuum environment was different from the dark space Qin had been in before. There were radiation, magnetic fields, rays, and various dust impurities that Qin was familiar with here. He calmed himself down and looked up. To his surprise, there was a gigantic planet beside him. This, Qin was shocked. He immediately flew out of the rubble and came to the star belt of this planet. Earthlings grew up looking at pictures of the 8 major planets in the solar system. Thus, Qin recognized it at a glance. This gigantic planet with a ring around it was none other than Saturn. Had he returned to the solar system? Thinking of this, Qin was suddenly excited. He quickly flew out of the star belt and went straight to the periphery of Saturn. A bright red star entered Qin's eyes, the sun. It really was the sun. The final trump card that the Tai Ching ancestor left for Heaven Capital was actually a teleportation array that led directly to the solar system. Qin looked back and saw that the 120,000 floating islands had all turned into ruins and were completely merged into Saturn's star belt. Yuhuan Tianzuan's aura was still there. Except for Taihua and the other 2 who were killed by Qin, the auras of the remaining 7 heavenly venerables were still there. They did not die because of the activation of the array. However, while the 10 heavenly venerables were fine, the residents of the Great World were in trouble. Only those whose cultivation had reached the golden core stage and above could maintain their vitality in the universe and luckily escape this disaster. However, even in Heaven Capital, there were only a few people whose cultivation had reached the golden core stage and above. As for those unlucky people whose cultivation had not reached the golden core stage, right now, they had already turned into ice-cold corpses one after another. There was no pain or wailing. Just like that, they died peacefully the moment the array was activated. There were at least tens of millions of them. Seeing this, even Qin, who had long been accustomed to death, could not help but feel sad at this moment. After this battle, the vitality of the ancient cultivators was greatly damaged. It also almost shook the foundation of Heaven Capital that had been passed down for tens of thousands of years. Qin originally only wanted to go to the Great World to find the Soul Mirror and use it to get Ying back. Who would have thought that this trip would be so complicated? Perhaps, the Tai Ching ancestor had considered the instability of the Great World from the beginning, so he deliberately left behind such an arrangement of cutting off the tail to survive and abandoning the rook to save the king. After all, Earth was their home and where their roots lay. Qin's cultivation was the highest, so he woke up the fastest. Thus, he quietly floated in the void and began to seriously consider the next problem of how to deal with the aftermath. Right now, the core strength of Heaven Capital was gathered in the solar system. If he left it alone, even without the 10 heavenly venerables, the 5 divine generals would be enough to flatten the solar system. But if he wanted to eliminate them all in one fell swoop, wouldn't it be too cruel? How should he deal with it? This was really a complicated problem. Chapter 444. Qin hadn't considered the issue of Tiandu's aftermath for too long. After all, He hadn't even settled his own family's affairs, so where would he find the time to care about other people's affairs? He had to find a way to retrieve Ying's soul. That was what Chen-Shi needed to do right now. Thus, Chen-Shi began a careful search of the ruins of Saturn's ring. Saturn's volume was 830 times that of Earth, and its rings were formed after comets and asteroids collided. Its width alone was 25 times that of Earth's diameter. Thus, when the 120,000 floating islands were thrown into Saturn's rings, it was like sand falling into the sea, not causing any waves at all. Perhaps because the formation had just been activated, the strange energy fluctuations on the soul mirror had completely disappeared. Chen-Shi searched the floating island ruins for a long time, almost inch by inch, before finally finding that damnable mirror in one of the meteorite ruins. The sky-bearing mirror of floating dawn. The soul mirror was buried deep in the soil, so it was inevitable that it was stained with some dust and dirt. Chen-Shi summoned it back with his inner energy, and a bone-chilling sensation came as soon as he touched it. In all honesty, the soul mirror really did appear to be a little mundane now that it had lost that unknown energy fluctuation. A dull mirror with a dark yellow frame. If it weren't for the exquisite patterns on the frame, and the mysterious power of the law faintly contained within, Chen-Shi wouldn't have believed that this mirror was actually a legendary artifact. Connate peerless treasure. Perhaps this was what they meant by returning to one's natural state. The soul mirror wasn't an offensive treasure, so for Tiandu, its symbolic significance was far greater than its actual significance. When the sun-moon star formation was activated, Chen-Shi didn't sense any spiritual fluctuations, so he deduced that the formation had nothing to do with the soul bridge. Whether it was the formation or the soul bridge. Both were meant to travel to Earth, but the methods used were completely different. The sun-moon star formation was too barbaric and crude, and Xian Nu's soul wasn't enough to activate it. Its true source of power was actually all the dragon veins in the great world. That was why when it was activated, it would set off a tidal wave of spiritual qi that was close to landslides and tsunamis. Chen-Shi tried to infuse his true essence into the soul mirror, but there was no reaction. Thus, after a moment of hesitation, he separated a strand of his spirit from his heart aperture and carefully poured it into the soul mirror. Chen-Shi was already cautious enough. After all, this was a connate cardinal treasure that he had never come into contact with before. But he didn't expect that the moment his spirit entered the mirror, it was as if Chen-Shi's soul had been sucked away by the soul mirror, causing him to lose all sense of the outside world. His divine sense entered the soul mirror. It was only then that this connate supreme treasure truly displayed its uniqueness. There was a strange consciousness space within the soul mirror, which was also the place where Xian Nu's soul was stored. As soon as Chen-Shi's consciousness entered the soul mirror, he felt as if he'd fallen into the yellow springs or the river Styx. He was surrounded by dense resentment that refused to dissipate. Perhaps his arrival had disturbed the Yin souls that had been imprisoned here for many years, so much so that the resentment of these Yin souls was like bats in a bat cave, and they actually rushed towards him in groups. Chen-Shi couldn't help but snort angrily when he saw this. The spiritual pressure of a Dongshu cultivator immediately spread out. Arbiter Xian Nu's cultivation wasn't high to begin with. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that she was an ordinary person, so how strong could her soul be? Yin souls didn't have consciousness, but they still retained their instincts to seek good fortune and avoid calamity. Thus, when Chen-Shi released his aura, the Yin souls scattered like frightened birds and beasts, not daring to approach him at all. One had to know that the soul mirror and the real world were two completely different concepts. The soul mirror was somewhat similar to a cultivator's sea of consciousness. In this space, the five senses were useless. They could only sense each other through their souls. And in Chen-Shi's perception, in this mysterious and strange soul mirror, there was a faint fluctuation of a soul that he was extremely familiar with. Although it was very weak, like a grain of gold in a vast sea of sand, Chen-Shi was still able to sense its existence immediately. This was the throbbing of the soul. It was also the bond between two people who truly loved each other. One look and they could see each other. One step was like a heavy city. Love was separated by mountains and seas. The mountains and seas couldn't be leveled. There were boats to cross the seas. There were roads to cross the mountains. This love overturned the mountains and seas. The mountains and seas could be leveled. Chen-shi suddenly looked over. He felt as if there was someone waiting for him in the depths of his sea of consciousness. Thus, he rushed forward without hesitation. Along the way, all the Een souls avoided him. Only the fluorescent light still floated silently in the same place. In the blink of an eye, Chen-shi arrived at the position of the fluorescent light. "Ying, is it you? I'm here to pick you up." As he spoke, he tried to reach out to the fluorescent light. However, he completely forgot that he was in a space similar to the heart aperture. There was no way he could directly touch the other party. The fluorescent light couldn't give Chen-shi any response. But from Chen-shi's point of view, there was no need to say anything more. Ying was right in front of him. As long as he brought this fluorescent light back to Earth, Ying would naturally wake up. Their family could also be reunited. Thinking of this, Chen-shi was suddenly very excited. Thus, he immediately used his powerful soul to gently envelop the fluorescent light. Then, he tried to bring it out of this damned soul mirror. But at this time, Chen-shi suddenly realized, this space seemed to only allow entry and not exit. There was no way out. However, after thinking about it for a while, he quickly felt relieved. After all, the spirit mirror was used to store Xian-Een souls. How could they escape so easily? If there was no exit, he could just open one himself. Speaking of which, it was strange, ever since Chen-shi's soul entered the spirit mirror, he completely lost his sense of his physical body. It was as if his physical body and soul were separated. Seeing this, Chen-shi didn't panic at all. At this moment, he had already stepped into the paradise void stage and had grasped the essence of the word void. It was just an ownerless object, so what if it was a connate cardinal treasure? Could it be that they could really trap him to death here? Thus, Chen-shi immediately abandoned all distracting thoughts and tried to establish a connection with his physical body. Perhaps it was his efforts that had worked. Not long after that, the physical body that he had left on the outskirts of Saturn sat down in mid-air with its legs crossed as if it were an electrified robot. At the same time, it began to inject its own energy into the soul mirror. The spirit mirror was not Chen-shi's magic treasure, and it didn't have an instruction manual. Therefore, he could only rely on his experience to determine that activating the spirit mirror required a huge amount of true core. Chen-shi originally planned to activate the spirit mirror to release the imprisoned Xian-Een souls. With him watching over the Xian-Een souls, no accidents would happen after the spirit mirror released the Xian-Een souls. However, Chen-shi never thought that, as he continued to inject true core into the spirit mirror, an extremely powerful energy fluctuation suddenly erupted from the spirit mirror. Then, under the influence of this unknown energy, the huge Saturn began to rotate in the opposite direction along the planet's orbit. Chapter 445. The so-called revolution was the circular movement of the 8 planets around the Sun. Every time the Earth revolved around the Sun, it meant that another year had passed. The 8 planets of the solar system were born from the accretion disk of the same star, so they all revolved in the same direction, from west to east around the Sun. The length of each planet's orbit was different, so it naturally took them different amounts of time to complete one revolution. Using Earth's time as an example, Mercury took 68 days to complete one revolution, Saturn took 29 years to complete one revolution, and Pluto, which was the furthest from the Sun, took as long as 248 years to complete one revolution. It was precisely because of this that it was very difficult for the 8 planets to appear in the same straight line at the same time. Once it did, it would become a legendary phenomenon, 9 stars aligned. Ever since the birth of human civilization, there had never been a true 9 stars aligned. Although there was a 7 stars aligned on May 20, 2000, it was only a convergence of 7 stars. The more planets there were, the more difficult it was for them to converge in a straight line at the same time. This was a geometrical problem. Compared to the age of the planets, human civilization was still far too short. With a mere 6,000 years of civilization, humans hadn't even fully explored the solar system, so how could they dare to dream of exploring the vast universe? On this day, October 21st. It was supposed to be an ordinary day. However, under the influence of the soul mirror, Tiandu unexpectedly descended into the solar system. Of course, this wasn't important. What was important was, after going through untold hardships, Qinshi finally obtained the soul mirror he yearned for day and night. Because of this, he also found in Ying's long-lost soul. However, what he didn't expect was, in the instant that he activated the soul mirror and attempted to release the Yin spirits within, the soul mirror didn't activate as he had imagined. Instead, it suddenly erupted with an extremely powerful and unknown force. This force was so strong that it even pushed Saturn, which was revolving in its orbit, to rotate in the opposite direction. Qinshi sensed that something was amiss in the outside world. Just as he was feeling a little puzzled, an extremely powerful tremor also appeared within the soul mirror. It was like a bottle of water being violently shaken in someone's hand, and the thousands of Yin spirits within the bottle were instantly sent flying in all directions. Qinshi hastily protected Qin Ruoying's divine soul. However, immediately thereafter, his soul was instantly dragged out of the soul mirror by a burst of invisible power, as if it were a small boat caught in a whirlpool. After his soul returned to his body, Qinshi suddenly opened his eyes. He lowered his head and saw that the soul mirror was still in his hands. However, the previously dull surface of the mirror now faintly rippled with circles of ripples. Seeing this, Qinshi was shocked and quickly withdrew his true essence. He withdrew his true essence. But unfortunately, however, the soul mirror continued to operate. At this moment, Qinshi suddenly realized, in addition to Saturn, even Jupiter, Mars, Neptune, and Uranus began to rotate in the opposite direction under the influence of this unknown force. Among them, Venus and Mercury, which were closer to the Sun, suddenly accelerated their revolutions and converged with the Earth in a straight line. With the exception of Earth, the 8 planets all changed their respective orbital speeds and directions, converging into a straight line at a speed visible to the naked eye. In an instant. The alignment of 9 stars, a sudden phenomenon. After 10,000 years, this peerless formation set up by the Taiqing divine ancestor was finally revealed to the world in its entirety. Even the great formation of sun, moon, and stars in the great world was actually only one of its subformations. The moment the alignment of 9 stars occurred, a large nomological net formed by the laws of heaven and earth vaguely appeared at the boundary of the solar system. This was something that had to be mentioned, the boundary of the solar system, which was the place where the sun's gravity could cover. There were as many as 100 billion comets there. These comets were gathered together by the sun's gravity, thus forming a spherical cloud, which was also known as the Oort cloud by scientists. If one were to look at it in another way, the Oort cloud could be seen as the atmosphere, and the comets within it could be seen as droplets of water vapor in the atmosphere. The moment the nomological net appeared, Qinshi was completely stunned. This large net was somewhat similar to the inescapable net in the great world, but it contained nomological attributes that Qinshi could not understand at all. One had to know that Qinshi had already stepped into the insightful void realm. However, when he saw this scene, he still felt a sense of loss and helplessness in his heart. It was like a primary school student trying to solve a calculus problem in university mathematics. The moment he saw those densely packed numbers and symbols, Qinshi was completely stunned. These were all left behind by the Taiqing divine ancestor. The solar system was not like the great world. The area of 120,000 floating islands added together was at most equivalent to the area of Asia. But what about the solar system? Even if one flew at the speed of light, it would take an entire year to fly to the boundary of the solar system. And this was only the radius of the solar system. The more you know, the more you can recognize your own insignificance. To the current Qinshi, this sentence had become the supreme truth. At that moment, Qinshi even began to suspect, had he returned to Earth from heavenly spiral? Before he had reached the insightful void realm, he naturally could not see the nomological imprints at the boundary of the solar system. And it was precisely because he could not see these nomological imprints that he, who was only at the soul formation stage, could fly into the solar system without any hindrance and then return to Earth without any hindrance. Now that he thought about it, Qinshi's heart was suddenly filled with a creepy feeling. It was too terrifying. He did not even know how he came back. He had originally thought that he would be able to roam the universe freely after reaching the soul formation stage. Who would have thought, even in the periphery of a mere solar system, there was such a shocking net of laws? If it were not for someone secretly opening the way for him, how could he, who was only at the soul formation stage, so easily pass through this net of nomological laws? Everyone would more or less suffer from paranoia, and Qin was no exception. So, he was afraid. Although he did not know the true use of this net of nomological laws, Qin could still sense the supreme power contained in it as long as he used his heart to feel it. This was an absolute power that was above the insightful void stage and even the Tao integration stage. Perhaps only true immortals who had experienced the great tribulation of heaven and earth could control it. With this in mind, Qin felt as if the soul mirror in his hand was a hot potato that he could not throw away even if he wanted to, and it was very hot in his hand, but if he continued to use the soul mirror, Qin would not dare to do so even if he had 100 guts. After all, Ying's soul was still inside. Who knew how many secrets were hidden in this broken mirror? What if he caused some kind of trouble? What should he do then? Qin was stunned as he looked at the spectacular 9-star alignment in front of him. Chapter 446. With scruples in their hearts, they were no longer fearless. Most young people looked down on those mediocre middle-aged people. Little did they know that these middle-aged people were just like them back then, fearless in life and fearless in death. Qin's fear did not originate from his heart, but from the outside world. This was because he had already become a middle-aged man from a young age. He had a lover, a child, and a family of his own. He was the sky of this family, the umbrella of this family, and the pillar of this family. So, shouldn't he be afraid? If it was in the past, Qin would definitely continue to study the soul mirror. He would even try to erase the mark left behind by the grand pure divine ancestor and turn it into his natal magic treasure. But now, such thoughts did not appear in his mind at all. After all, Qin was already old. Back to the spectacular 9-star alignment, which could be called a space wonder. Under the push of the soul mirror, the 9 planets quickly converged into a straight line. From afar, it looked like a cannon was in place and ready to fire at any time. The 9-star alignment lasted for about 2 minutes. During these 2 minutes, Qin's mood was as tense as a string. He was afraid that the 9-star alignment would affect Earth, so he raised his essence, energy, and spirit to the highest point early on. If anything strange happened next, Qin would rush back to Earth immediately and take away Nian, Ying, and everyone else he cared about. He might not be able to stop the 9-star alignment, but it would not be easy to hurt his family in front of him. Qin had already prepared for the worst, but he did not expect. What happened next was completely different from what he had imagined. The 9-star alignment did not have any destructive impact on the solar system. The only thing that was affected was the large net of laws entrenched in the periphery of the solar system. He saw, the moment the 9 stars gathered, the large net that contained the unknown power of laws began to flicker faintly. If the 9-star alignment was a key, then the large net of laws was a door. All he needed to do was insert the key into the keyhole and twist it gently. This huge net of laws that had shrouded the solar system for over 10,000 years slowly loosened. The stars moved, and all living things were in the universe. The 9 stars returned to their positions, and the laws disappeared. After the invisible power from the soul mirror disappeared, the 8 planets and the degraded Pluto began to revolve in their original orbits. This rare spectacle of the 9 stars' alignment was like an unreachable mirage. Apart from making Qin worry for a while, it didn't leave anything else behind. After a flash of white light, the soul mirror reverted back to its previous dull and lifeless state. At this moment, the large net of laws that made even Qin's heart palpitate completely vanished. Qin frowned as he looked at the distant Oat Nebula. That was the boundary of the solar system, and also the boundary between the solar system and the universe. He vaguely felt that he had accidentally triggered some sort of mechanism, so he could not help but want to go to the Oat Nebula to check it out. But after thinking about it, in the end, Qin suppressed the throbbing in his heart and flew towards Saturn's ring with the soul mirror in hand. The people from Celestial Capital were still unconscious. Once they woke up, these people would inevitably yearn for their former home, which would bring a huge impact to Earth. She did not want any external forces to interfere with the self-development of Earth's civilization, so he set up a large formation on Saturn's ring and imprisoned all the refugees from celestial capital in the formation. This was only a temporary measure. Ying had not woken up yet, and Nian was still waiting for him at home, so why would she waste too much time dealing with the refugees from celestial capital? It would not be too late to come back and clean up the mess in celestial capital after he dealt with the problems at home. Therefore, after hurriedly setting up the formation, she headed straight for Earth without looking back. Nian, I'm back. She did not know that at the same time he set off to return to Earth, outside the distant Oat Nebula. A wooden boat was rushing into the Oat Nebula at an extremely fast speed. The Oat Nebula was made up of trillions of comets. Compared to it, the small wooden boat suddenly looked extremely small, like a microorganism under a microscope. Two teenagers of 15 or 16 years old sat on the boat. One of them sat at the bow, holding a magic weapon that looked like an oar in his hand. Every time the teenager waved the oar, the wooden boat would suddenly rush forward tens of thousands of miles in an extremely strange way. Changhua. What are you doing? The teenager sitting at the stern was busy cultivating, so he did not pay attention to the direction the wooden boat was heading. At this moment, he looked up and found that the surroundings were full of comets of different sizes. He was so scared that his face turned pale. He quickly grabbed the corner of the teenager's clothes and shouted, "This is the Tianshu ruins. Do you want to die? Turn around. Turn around. I don't want to die here with you." Hearing this, the teenager called Changhua seemed to have gone crazy. He did not care about his companion's dissuasion. Instead, he waved the oar in his hand wildly, so that the speed of the wooden boat instantly increased by 30%. Seeing this, the teenager sitting at the stern was not willing to wait for death. He immediately raised his hands and directly launched an attack at the teenager who was driving the boat. The boat of friendship really capsized so easily. Changhua seemed to have expected this. Seeing that his companion was attacking him, he did not panic at all. He directly used the oar as a weapon and fought back. The two of them were about the same age, so their cultivation was naturally similar. Therefore, while Changhua was dealing with his companion's attack, he still had time to laugh and said, "Fei, didn't you always say that the universe is so big that although you can't see it all in your life, you have to set foot in 2 or 3 places? The Tianshu ruins are right in front of you. Don't you want to go in and have a look?" Hearing this, the teenager called Fei's face turned cold. He said hatefully, "The Tianshu ruins is known as an ancient forbidden area. Anyone who trespasses will die. Do you really think that these legends are only used to fool 3-year-old children? Ha 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 ha. Are you afraid? Of course I'm not afraid of you." The teenager was arrogant to begin with. How could he endure such ridicule from his companion? Therefore, Fei no longer showed mercy. He directly drew his long sword and fought with Changhua. The two of them fought back and forth, but they did not notice at all. The wooden boat had already gone deep into the Oat Nebula. When the wooden boat rushed out of the Oat Nebula, the two of them suddenly felt that their eyes were wide open, so they could not help but stop what they were doing. This is the Tianshu ruins? We're actually here? The two teenagers stared blankly at the solar system in front of them. Even the daring Changhua was shocked at this moment. The reason why Changhua dared to drive the wooden boat close to the Oat Nebula was because he knew the power of this cloud-piercing shuttle. One had to know that this cloud-piercing shuttle was his father's most important treasure. It was personally made by a supreme being, and its speed was extremely fast. When the host was in danger, the cloud-piercing shuttle could even instantly turn into a defensive treasure to protect the host. This was also the reason why Changhua dared to go close to the Oat Nebula. He just wanted to scare Fei. Who would have thought that the two of them would actually break into the legendary forbidden area without any hindrance, the Tianshu ruins? Chapter 447. Generosity should be rewarded, and arrogance should stop the youthful heart. According to Earth's standards, Changhua and Fei were still underage. However, relying on their extraordinary cultivation base, these two brats, who were still wet behind the ears, were actually more courageous than most people. They didn't understand how they could enter the Tianshu ruins so easily. However, after confirming that it really happened, even the cautious Ife didn't complain about going back. Instead, he became excited. The boat of friendship started moving again. The two youths squeezed at the front of the boat and watched the cloud-piercing shuttle enter the solar system at an extremely fast speed. There was no fear of the unknown in their eyes, only a strong yearning for the ancient legends. Chonghua, it's better to be careful. Rumor has it that the Tianshu ruins are the cultivation grounds of the ancient Almighty. Although there may be great opportunities hidden inside, there are also hidden dangers. Our cultivation levels are still low. Without this cloud-piercing shuttle, we wouldn't even be able to roam the stars freely. If there's some kind of formation on this planet, we'll probably die here today. As he spoke, Ife pointed at Pluto, which was not far away. Pluto was only 1/3 the size of the moon. From afar, it didn't give off any sense of visual oppression. Dwarf planets like Pluto were extremely common in the universe. However, Pluto was inside the Tianshu ruins. Therefore, even though the two of them had roamed the stars since they were young and were used to all kinds of dangers in the universe, they didn't dare to approach it at all. Therefore, the two of them drove the wooden boat around Pluto, and after making sure that there was nothing worth exploring, they quickly sailed to the next planet. In reality, the solar system was like an egg. The sun was the yolk, the space where the 8 planets were was the egg white, and the outermost Oat nebula, which was covered with trillions of comets, was the eggshell. The dense comets floated around the solar system, so the situation inside the solar system couldn't be seen from the outside. And this was in the eyes of outsiders, Tianshu ruins. For the immortal cultivators in the outside world, the Tianshu ruins were like a dried-up treasure trove. According to ancient records, before the Tianshu ruins were sealed, it was once a holy land for cultivation. Even the glorious jade clear grotto heaven was once only one of the inheritances in the Tianshu ruins. Of course, the Tianshu ruins back then was not called the Tianshu ruins. Instead, it was called Tianshu realm. Later, for some reason, the Tianshu realm, which was at its peak, suddenly declined. Then, an ancient almighty set up a heaven and earth formation, completely isolating this galaxy from the outside world. Under the protection of the formation, no one could approach the Oat nebula. In the blink of an eye, tens of thousands of years had passed. Everything about the Tianshu ruins gradually faded from people's minds as time passed. It wasn't until a few years ago that a brilliant genius appeared in the jade clear grotto heaven that the Tianshu ruins returned to the public sight. This genius had cultivated for less than 1,000 years, but his cultivation had already stepped into the ranks of Empyrean. Because of this, he was known as the #1 cultivator below the supreme realm. He even had hopes of becoming the next supreme headmaster of the jade clear grotto. But it was a pity, however, this young, celestial lord was crazy for some unknown reason. He actually wanted to use the method of exploring the Tianshu ruins to make his name resound throughout the Supreme Palace enclosure. Yuan, read, Yuan, as in broken and ruined walls. Luoyang was known as the ancient capital of 13 dynasties, but after 2,000 years, it had become a third-tier city. The Tianshu ruins had been quiet for more than 2,000 years. Tens of thousands of years had passed. The immortal cultivators in the Supreme Palace enclosure had long forgotten its former glory. This Tianshu realm master wanted to use the Tianshu ruins as a stepping stone, but he never expected, in front of the sun, moon, and stars formation, he was like a moth to a flame. He did not even cause a spark before he turned into a wisp of smoke and disappeared from the world. This was also the reason why no one dared to approach the Oat nebula. The young man did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. He was not afraid of the slightest thing. Thus, the two daring brats piloted the cloud-piercing shuttle and hurried in the direction of Earth, back to Qinshi. After imprisoning the people of Tiandu in Saturn's ring, he rushed back to Earth. Shangjing City, which he had not seen in a long time. The courtyard, which he had not seen in a long time. It was late autumn. The old locust tree in the courtyard had already shed its leaves. The withered leaves were piled up on the bluestone floor. When the autumn wind blew, a few leaves drifted out of the courtyard. It was not the courtyard that was deserted, but the people's hearts. She did not like this feeling. Thus, he frowned and looked around the courtyard. After confirming that his restrictions were not damaged, he immediately waved his hand and used his supreme cultivation to forcefully reverse the flowering of the plants in the courtyard. In an instant, it was as if spring had returned to the earth. Hundreds of flowers bloomed. Even the old locust tree in the courtyard suddenly grew lush green leaves. Accompanied by the overflowing fragrance of the flowers, she strode toward the west wing. It was now 4:00 in the afternoon in Shangjing. Nian was not at home. Qin Yongyan and the big cat should be waiting for her at the school gate. Thus, in the huge courtyard, there was only a fish that could only roll its eyes all day long. She pushed open the door. Qin Ruoying's figure came into view. A year was enough time for the brand new quilt to be dyed a little dark yellow. However, it did not leave any trace on Qin Ruoying's face. She lay quietly on the bed as if she was asleep. She came to the bedside. After smoothing out her hair that was messed up by Nian, he gently held his lover's hand. "Ying, I'm back, I'm sorry, I've kept you waiting." As she spoke, she took out that damned broken mirror from her bosom. This was the first time he looked at a magic treasure so carefully. It was as if he was not looking at himself in the mirror, but Qin Ruoying in the mirror. This was a connate treasure. Not only did it involve the soul of Xian Nu, but it also involved the great formation of sun and moon and stars. Thus, she did not dare to activate it lightly. He had found the soul mirror. Ying had not woken up yet. So, what was he waiting for? She hesitated for a long time. Then, as if he had finally come to a decision, he gently kissed his lover's forehead. Then, he silently sat cross-legged next to Qin Ruoying. He prepared to let his soul enter the soul mirror again. Then, like last time, he would imbue the soul mirror with vital essence in order to activate it. This time, whether it was the explosion of the sky or the 9-star alignment, he must bring Ying's soul out. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Website. Chapter 448. She hesitated for a long time before he finally came to a decision. He planted a gentle kiss on his lover's forehead before he sat down next to Qin Ruoying with his legs crossed. He was prepared to let his soul enter the spirit mirror again and infuse his inner energy into it to activate it just like last time. This time, whether it was the explosion of the heavenly capital or the 9-star alignment, he had to bring Ying's soul out. It was fine when she didn't go home. But when she got home and saw that her lover was still lying quietly in bed, Shi's heart suddenly felt very uncomfortable. He was very upset because he had failed to protect Qin Ruoying. After all, for a cultivator who had reached the Dongshu stage, what was the point of cultivating if he couldn't even protect the woman he loved? "Even if I lived forever, I would be nothing more than a soulless zombie without you by my side." Therefore, Shi was like a tortoise eating a scalpel this time. He was determined to rescue Qin Ruoying's soul. Even though he knew that activating the spirit mirror might lead to some unexpected things, he was not willing to wait any longer. He had waited for a long time. Ying had also waited for a long time. He couldn't live without his lover, and Nian couldn't live without her mother. This family couldn't live without a mistress. Therefore, after Shi made his decision, he immediately infused his inner energy into the spirit mirror without hesitation. When he gave it his all, his inner energy was as vast and mighty as the Yangtze River, or as endless as the surging Yellow River. As the incomparably dense inner energy flowed into the spirit mirror, a strange white light suddenly lit up on the surface of the spirit mirror. Seeing this, Shi immediately held his breath and entered the white light again using the method of astral projection. It was still the same strange space of consciousness. However, after Shi entered, he suddenly realized that there were many subtle changes in this place. There were even some colors. One had to know that the space of consciousness was like a universe that had yet to be developed. Consciousness was an inexplicable thing. There was no concept of dimensions here, so the five senses were naturally useless. Everything could only be felt by the heart. As a result, everything he saw, heard, and even touched here. In fact, it was just a manifestation of one's inner consciousness. Therefore, theoretically speaking, there would not be any changes in the space of consciousness, because it did not have a proper form to begin with. But the strange thing was, this time, however, Qinshi's feelings were completely different from last time. In his perception, this originally chaotic space of consciousness seemed to have been split open by Pangu's giant axe at this moment. There was a sky here, and suddenly there was a land. There was a dim yellow aurora in the sky and a dark green Styx river on the ground. Qinshi was now standing in the middle of the river Styx. The river was not deep, barely reaching his knees. Qinshi was a little surprised by the changes here. After carefully sensing for a while, he suddenly realized that the souls that had previously filled the entire space of consciousness had now all turned into fish in the river Styx, and were constantly rushing forward with the river Styx. Seeing this, Qinshi could not help but frown as he walked forward along the river Styx. He did not know how long he had walked. Only then did he finally find that familiar fluctuation of divine soul again. It was still that weak fluorescent light. Yingying's soul was there. Qinshi immediately ran toward the fluorescent light. However, as he got closer and closer to the fluorescent light, Qinshi's mood became more and more serious. Because, he suddenly realized, the fluorescent light was at the end of the river Styx. Thousands of souls were following the river Styx and pouring into the fluorescent light. After realizing that something was wrong, Qinshi's heart could not help but skip a beat. He thought that something had happened here. Therefore, he did not even have time to think. He immediately used his soul to wrap around the fluorescent light and tried to bring it out of the soul mirror. However, the strange thing was, this fluorescent light seemed to have taken root in the space of consciousness. No matter how Qinshi tried, the fluorescent light floated there quietly and did not move at all. After all, Qinshi was now an immortal cultivator at the Dongshu stage. Even if he had left his physical body, his soul should still be extremely powerful. However, no matter how hard he tried, the fluorescent light did not move at all. After a few fruitless attempts, Qinshi was instantly enraged. After hearing a wild roar, an extremely strong golden light suddenly erupted from his body. Then, this golden light was like the sun rising from the east, instantly illuminating half of the space of consciousness and completely enveloping the fluorescent light. At the same time, Qinshi's reckless behavior seemed to have affected the river Styx below. As a result, the river Styx suddenly dried up. Countless souls were like startled birds, instantly turning into soul bodies and flying out in all directions. The chaos had not even split, but it was already so severely injured. How powerful was Qinshi's soul? What had entered the soul mirror before was only a wisp of it. But now, Qinshi wanted to completely separate his soul from his physical body and pour it all into the soul mirror. He wanted to use his soul to build a soul bridge that connected Qin Ruoying to the outside world and use it to forcibly bring her out of the soul mirror. Fortunately, the soul mirror was now an ownerless object. Otherwise, Qinshi's violent and barbaric actions would definitely cause the soul mirror to suffer a backlash, and his soul would definitely be severely injured as a result. Desperate times called for desperate measures. Qinshi did not care so much now. In any case, he had to take Yingying's soul away today. Thus, under his continuous efforts, the fluorescent light was forcibly pulled out from the end of the river Styx. That's right, it was pulled out. This fluorescent light was like a plant, and it had taken root at the end of the river Styx. After Qinshi plucked the streak of light out of the ground with brute force, a burst of intense vibrations erupted from within the soul mirror again. It was the same as before. Tens of thousands of Yin's souls were shaken and scattered in all directions. Qinshi's soul was like a small boat that had encountered a whirlpool. Suddenly, it was pulled by an invisible force, as if it was trying to drive him out of the soul mirror. But this time, Qinshi was fully prepared. Thus, the moment the invisible force appeared, he had already used his soul to wrap the fluorescent light up in layers. Then, like a smuggler who had successfully avoided the security check, Qinshi successfully brought the fluorescent light back to the real world. Shi succeeded. But he did not know that the moment he left the soul mirror with the fluorescent light, the river Styx surged out again. Tens of thousands of souls turned into fish and gathered in the river Styx once again. And at the end of the river Styx, suddenly, a ray of fluorescent light appeared. Please remember the domain name of this book. .com, website of the wonderful book.com. Chapter 449. Note, I made a mistake when I pasted the previous chapter. If you didn't see my note at the end of the chapter, then it's the wrong chapter. Sorry. The so-called husband and wife were actually, although they didn't have the colorful phoenix wings, their hearts were as one. Therefore, the moment Qin Ruoying opened her eyes, Shi suddenly realized that there might be a problem. As expected. After Qin Ruoying opened her eyes and saw him, she didn't get up and hug him immediately. Instead, she looked at him up and down with a strange and cold look. Seeing this, Shi couldn't help but frown slightly. At the same time, he stretched out his right hand to see her situation. But what Shi didn't expect was that, just as he reached out his hand, Qin Ruoying suddenly leaped up like a carp. Following that, she smoothly executed a set of wrist and arm lock martial arts. Looking at this posture, Ying seemed to want to take him down in one fell swoop. This set of self-defense kung fu was passed down in the Qin family. Although Qin Ruoying hadn't come into contact with kung fu before, she still stepped into the celestial being stage with the help of Shi. It should be known that celestial beings were no longer in the ranks of ordinary people. It was just a few moves of wrist-locking kung fu. She only needed to take a look at it to master it. Qin Ruoying had always disliked fighting with people. If it wasn't for the fact that cultivation could increase her lifespan, and thus she could stay with Shi forever, she was afraid that she wouldn't be willing to spend too much time on the road of cultivation. But now, Qin Ruoying, on the other hand, acted as if she had been possessed by Qin Wanqing. The moment she came up, she started fighting without a single word. Shi was afraid of hurting her, so he immediately dispersed all the strength in his body. As a result, Qin Ruoying suddenly pressed him down on the bed by his arm. A dignified Dongshu stage cultivator was actually pressed down on the bed by a celestial being at this moment. If this matter were to spread, it would only shock people on the spot. Shi didn't dare to move at all, but Qin Ruoying didn't show any mercy. After pressing Shi down, Qin Ruoying turned over and mounted the horse directly on his back, and pressed him firmly on the bed. At this moment, Qin Ruoying seemed to not know Shi at all. After pressing his neck from behind, she asked coldly, "Who are you?" Hearing this, Shi could only tilt his head and ask in a muffled voice, "Ying, you don't even recognize me?" "I don't know you." After saying that, Qin Ruoying raised her head and looked around. The room was still the same room. She didn't know where she was. She didn't know she was, but she couldn't remember anything. She's teach she, remember anything? Amnesia? Maybe. From the moment Qin Ruoying woke up to the moment she captured Shi, the entire process seemed to have happened in the blink of an eye. At this moment, Shi could roughly guess the reason. Normal people might think that this was amnesia. But in reality, this was a sign of a missing soul. It was probably because he forcibly took her soul out of the spirit mirror, so the soul he took out was incomplete, and Qin Ruoying lost her memories. After figuring out the crux of the matter, Shi's originally tense mood immediately relaxed. It wasn't a big problem, it was just that her soul was missing. At worst, he could go to the spirit mirror later, and the problem would be solved. However, Qin Ruoying's attitude towards him made Shi, who was used to Ying's gentleness and consideration, suddenly feel like he was enjoying himself. In this world, other than Ying, which woman could ride on his back? Nian was still young, so she couldn't be considered a woman. Qin Ruoying rode on Shi's back, and her two legs were straddling Shi's waist. Therefore, the roots of her thighs were tightly pressed against Shi's waist, and he was firmly sandwiched between them. Although she used a lot of strength, this strength was not even enough to tickle Shi. Therefore, Shi was not in a hurry to struggle. Instead, he lay on the bed and silently felt the softness coming from Ying's thighs. TSK, this feeling, it was really bouncy, full, and alluring. He was used to eating a lady from a noble family who was as gentle as water. Suddenly, she was replaced with an ice beauty who was as cold as ice. The taste was simply wonderful. If Qin Ruoying knew what he was thinking, she would probably raise her hand and slap him across the face. Humph, men are all pigs. She was like a dead fish, lying on the bed and not moving at all. At this moment, Qin Ruoying seemed to have realized that her posture was a little indecent, so she immediately jumped up from his body and went straight to the door of the west wing. She was busy savoring the feeling, and when Qin Ruoying left, it instantly made him feel a sense of emptiness, so he hurriedly got up and chased after her. "Ying, don't run around, where are you going?" Seeing that she was chasing after her, Qin Ruoying turned her head and glared fiercely at him. She had no choice but to hurriedly take a few steps back, and then put on an old face, indicating that he would not go near her. After that, Qin Ruoying then turned and walked out of the west wing. When she walked out of the house and saw the beautiful scenery of hundreds of flowers in full bloom, Qin Ruoying could not help but smile. Ying had always liked flowers and trees, so the courtyard had long been filled with potted plants by Qin. When Qin returned home, he had conveniently changed the flowering period of the plants in the courtyard, but he did not expect that it would come in handy at this moment. Even if Qin Ruoying lost her memory, this hobby did not seem to have changed. Thus, she quietly stood in front of a lily and carefully savored the faint fragrance coming from it. Until this moment, Qin felt as if he had seen the lover that he was so familiar with. Ying was still Ying. She had not changed. And he had not changed either. Qin Ruoying minded her own business in the courtyard, admiring the flowers by herself. She obediently waited by the side, feeding the fish in the fish tank from time to time. The two seemed to be strangers, but in fact, there was a faint bond between the two. Just like a young couple quarreling on the street, the girl walked quickly in front, and the guy followed far behind her. Even if the passers-by did not know them, they would immediately realize, the two of them should be a couple. They seemed to ignore each other, but in fact, they had been ruthlessly abusing the single people on the street. Yes, this was the feeling. The strange ambiguous atmosphere did not last long. When she noticed that someone had walked into Dongming Alley, a faint smile suddenly appeared on his face. Calculating the time, Nian should be home from school. I wonder, the moment she saw her parents, what kind of expression would she have on her face? Anyway, no matter what expression she had, that little face would definitely be very cute, right? Chapter 450. In the golden autumn of October, the smell of osmanthus wafted through the air. Whenever it was the middle of October, there would always be a sudden gust of wind in Shangjing. It seemed to indicate that the weather was about to turn cold and that everyone should wear more clothes. The bus stop sign was not at the entrance of Dongming Alley, but at a crossroad 300 meters away from the alley. After the little girl got off the bus, she immediately felt a burst of cold air rush up her back, so she couldn't help but hug her school uniform tightly. Looking at her pitiful appearance, Qin Yongyan smiled as he picked up the little fellow from the ground. Using his own inner strength, he chased away the chill in her body before quickly bringing her to the entrance of the alley. Every day, they would get on and off the bus here on time. Of course, the difference between the little girl and the other children was that in addition to being picked up by her grandfather, she was always accompanied by a study companion and pet, the big cat. When they got home, Qin Yongyan would personally cook for the little girl, and the little girl would obediently return to the west wing. She would either play with the big cat for a while, or watch TV for a while waiting for dinner. This was the daily routine of the grandfather and grandson pair. Usually, at this time, the big cat would quickly jump off the bus roof, and then slowly walk behind the grandfather and grandson pair. Similar scenes kept repeating. But, the big cat's behavior today was a bit strange. As soon as it returned to the entrance of the alley, it seemed to have discovered something. After lying on the ground and sniffing a few times, it was like a dog, with its tail between its legs, it jumped up the wall and onto the roof. Even Qin Yongyan didn't have time to react before the big cat's figure completely disappeared from the top of the wall. Meow. Then, the big cat started to cry from the other side of the wall. But, as soon as its voice sounded, it was as if something was stuck in its neck, and it suddenly stopped. Qin Yongyan felt that something was wrong. After more than a year of living together, he and the big cat were very familiar with each other, so even if the big cat only cried out softly, Qin Yongyan could roughly distinguish its thoughts based on the pitch of its voice. The big cat's cry was so strange that Qin Yongyan couldn't tell what it meant. Considering that the big cat was different from other animals, once it barked, something must have happened. Therefore, Qin Yongyan quickly carried the little fellow back to the courtyard. Wow! Grandfather! Have the flowers bloomed? It smells so good. As soon as the door was pushed open, a refreshing fragrance of flowers rushed to the tip of the little fellow's nose. Thus, she hurriedly gestured for Qin Yongyan to put her down and ran towards the Chuehua gate. It was still the circular drooping flower gate. The little fellow would walk back and forth through this door several times a day. But this time, when she came to the door again, the scene behind the door became a scene that she would never forget for the rest of her life. He saw, inside this door, Qin Shi was standing quietly in the middle of the courtyard, looking at her with a smile. Qin Ruoying stood in front of the potted plant in the corner of the courtyard. Although she pretended to admire the flowers as if nothing had happened, her eyes couldn't help but drift to the door of the Chuehua gate. That courtyard, that door. That flower, that person. The little fellow stood outside the door and was stunned for about 5 seconds. Qin Shi didn't say anything and just looked at her with a smile. He watched as the expression on her face changed from dazed to surprised, and finally into a kind of crazy ecstasy. Daddy, Daddy. Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. She opened her small hands and ran towards Qin Shi like a spoiled child. At this time, Qin Shi threw the big cat aside, then quickly stepped forward and hugged her tightly in his arms. The best gift was a hug after a long separation. This kind of hug didn't just come from love. It could also come from family. Daddy, I missed you so much. I missed you so much. Qin Shi squatted on the ground, the little fellow buried her head deep in his shoulder, and then started to act spoiled to him in a muffled voice. Qin Shi hugged her small body, and his palm unconsciously rubbed her back gently. After not seeing her for a long time, Nian had grown taller again. With just a casual glance, Qin Shi knew the exact height of the little fellow. 125, 11 cm. This height was considered above average among children of the same age. According to this trend, Nian should be like her mother in the future, with a pair of straight and slender legs. Yes, definitely at the level of a supermodel. Although Qin Shi had been away for more than a year, the little fellow didn't look like him at all. Instead, she was more clingy to him than before. The father and daughter were lovey-dovey for a long time. The little fellow refused to let go for a long time, as if she was afraid that if she let go, Qin Shi would leave again. When the little fellow was tired of being lovey-dovey in Qin Shi's arms, her eyes naturally drifted to Qin Ruoying. Mommy. You're awake? As she spoke, the little fellow pushed Qin Shi away, as if she wanted to run to Qin Ruoying. But at this time, Qin Shi suddenly pulled her back. Nian, wait a minute, Mommy has just recovered, and now there are still some sequelae. She can't even recognize Daddy, just like an injured small animal. If we get too close, we may scare her, and then her old illness will relapse, so you'd better not go over now. Let's give her some space and let her be alone. When Mommy's illness is fully recovered, we'll go out to play as a family, okay? After hearing that Daddy did not allow her to get close to Mommy, the little fellow's mouth immediately pouted. She was still very obedient, so she immediately retracted the leg that she had stepped out. But, although she retracted her leg, her little eyes were still fixed on Qin Ruoying. That pair of big watery eyes stared at Qin Ruoying, and Qin Ruoying could not help but frown. The reason why she did not leave immediately was that everything in the courtyard gave her a familiar feeling, and she had no place to go. Even if she had lost her memory, Qin Ruoying still felt that the little girl in front of her was very familiar. This feeling was even more familiar than the one that Qin Shi gave her. After all, Qin Shi was only her lover. And this little fellow in front of her was a piece of flesh that had fallen from her body. Therefore, Qin Ruoying just frowned and looked at the little fellow. She stood still on the spot. The little fellow remembered Daddy's teachings, and even if she wanted to go forward, she did not dare to. This strange atmosphere lasted for a few seconds. When Qin realized that something was wrong, his mind suddenly throbbed, so he softly whispered in the little fellow's ear, "Nian Nian, why don't you go and try? Mommy doesn't know me, but maybe she knows you. Don't worry, if Mommy does anything strange, Daddy will pull you back immediately, just like going to the zoo to see an orangutan." Qin carefully reminded the little fellow of the rules of entering the garden. However, he forgot the most important point, and that was, Qin Ruoying was already a celestial being. Therefore, if he did not use telepathy, every word that he said to the little fellow would be transmitted to Qin Ruoying's ears. As a result, Qin Ruoying silently watched the father and daughter's performance as if she was looking at an idiot. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, Wonderful Book Mobile Version Website, .com. Chapter 451. The reunion was unexpected. I hope you've been well since we last met. Qin Ruoying heard every word of the conversation between the father and daughter. Although she had lost her memory, it didn't mean that she had lost her mind. So she was very clear about what this conversation meant. In fact, since she woke up, Qin Ruoying had been seriously thinking about everything that had happened in front of her. The reason why she was able to remain so calm and collected was simply because that was her personality to begin with. At this time, although Qin Ruoying didn't wear a sign on her face at all times like Qin Wanqing with the words, "Keep away," clearly written on it, she still gave people a feeling that it was difficult to approach her. After losing the emotional bond between her and Qin, she finally showed her true self. After all, a woman couldn't just be gentle to strangers, right? This was the Qin Ruoying that Qin knew at the beginning. She was a real goddess. So, she could only be admired from afar and couldn't be touched. Qin didn't dare to get close to her. At this time, the little girl also found that her mother had become a little different from before. So, even with Qin's encouragement behind her, the little girl still refused to take a step forward. Children were actually very sensitive. When the little girl found that her mother looked at her in a completely different way, it was as if someone had poured a bucket of cold water on her in the middle of winter. She was completely cold. It wasn't that she didn't want to, but she didn't dare. Seeing this, Qin had to whisper a few words of encouragement in the little girl's ear. But after the little girl heard it, she still cowered and refused to go forward. Regarding this, Qin couldn't help but have a headache. But at this time, a surprising scene suddenly appeared. Qin Ruoying, who had been motionless all this time, actually took the initiative to wave to the little girl, as if to ask her to go over. Seeing this, how could the little girl hold back? Almost instantly, she took a step forward and directly pounced on Qin Ruoying. "Mother! Mother! You're finally awake. I miss you so much." As soon as he got close to Qin Ruoying, the little guy suddenly hugged her waist and buried his head in her waist, acting very coquettishly. At that moment, Qin Ruoying's body clearly stiffened. But then, she took the initiative to place her hand on the little fellow's head and gently stroked it. Qin Ruoying didn't know why he was so close to this little girl. After being hugged tightly by her, Qin Ruoying faintly felt a strange yet familiar intimacy. Could it be, am I really her mother? Thinking of this, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but turn to look at Qin. At this time, Qin was smiling from the bottom of his heart because of their reunion. It was fine even if he didn't laugh. This smile made Qin Ruoying's face turn cold. She even began to wonder if she had been deceived by this father and daughter pair. This unique reunion quickly came to an end. Except for the little fellow, Qin Ruoying didn't show any face to anyone. One had to know that there were no outsiders in this house. One was her husband, the other was her father. The two most important men in her life could only stand aside at this moment, looking helplessly at her and the little fellow playing in the courtyard. Although the scene of this reunion might be a little different from what they had imagined. But at least their family was reunited. Qin was back, and Qin Ruoying was also awake. This family, it finally felt like home again. Then, the power of cooking returned to Qin Shi's hands. In order to celebrate this reunion, Qin Shi used all his trump cards. Whether it was flying in the sky, running on the ground, or swimming in the water, everything had to be served on the table today. In short, 9 dishes and 1 soup were served, and everything was to be perfect. The little fellow hadn't eaten Qin Shi's dishes in a long time, so when the first dish was served, she pulled Qin Ruoying directly to their seats, and kept yelling for her father to hurry up and serve the dishes. Qin Ruoying didn't stand on ceremony. Although she hadn't acknowledged Qin Shi yet, she didn't feel a trace of repulsion towards this man in front of her. Instead, she felt a faint tug at her heart. She was secretly observing Qin Shi, but she didn't know that her every move had been seen by Qin Shi. Qin Shi was very pleased with himself, but he didn't show it on his face. If it wasn't for the fact that his sister-in-law hadn't woken up yet, and he had to go to the spirit mirror again, Qin Shi even wanted to spend more time with Ying after she lost her memory. Dinner was quite enjoyable. During the meal, Qin Ruoying didn't say a word, so the little fellow naturally became the communication bridge between her parents. Under Qin Shi's instructions, she kept yelling for her mother to eat. That silly little look of hers made Qin Ruoying chuckle. Qin Yongyan had never liked to interfere in his children's affairs. Seeing that Qin Shi had returned safely, he could naturally take off the burden on his shoulders. Therefore, after confirming that Qin Ruoying's amnesia wasn't a big problem, he hastily ate his dinner, and then went back to his room to shut himself in. After dinner, the sky had already darkened. By the time Qin Shi finished cleaning up the table and chairs, the little fellow had already pulled Qin Ruoying back to the west wing to watch cartoons. Qin Shi hesitated for a moment outside the door. Just as he was about to step into the room, Qin Ruoying's cold voice sounded from inside the room. "Get out." Hearing this, Qin Shi could only shake his head and smile bitterly. Well, he didn't even have the right to enter the room now. Qin Shi was really depressed. At this time, the little fellow didn't forget to add, "Dad, you play by yourself. Mom said, you're not allowed to enter the room. I'll sleep with Mom today." Qin Shi had no choice but to turn around and walk into the guest room that Xiao Yuan stayed in before. As early as when Qin Shi left, Xiao Yuan had already successfully entered a multinational company as an intern under Gu Lao's introduction, so the tea house was completely closed. Qin Shi lay on the bed, thinking about how to reopen the tea house tomorrow while listening to the movements in the room next door. Although Qin Ruoying lost her memory, she still had a kind of heartfelt care for Ninian. This also made Qin Shi feel very gratified. Ying was still the same Ying. Although incomplete, she was still the Ying that he couldn't help but be fascinated by. Qin Ruoying seemed to have forgotten how to cultivate, so when the little fellow fell asleep, she silently lay on the side. Qin Shi was on this side of the wall, she was on the other side of the wall. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens God Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 452. It was night. It was a dark and windy night. Without alerting anyone, Qin Shi quietly slipped into the east wing from the guest room. After returning home this time, he actually had a lot of urgent matters to deal with. The first in line was Qin Ruoying, then the second in line was, naturally, it was his sister-in-law. Qin Xueqing was lying quietly in the east wing. The furnishings in the room were almost exactly the same as 2 years ago. Under the protection of Qin Shi's restriction, not to mention thieves, even Wang Chuanjiu could only look at her daughter through the window. Although Qin Xueqing had a bad temper, her heart was still quite soft. She definitely belonged to the type that was tough on the outside but soft on the inside. Therefore, sometimes even Qin Shi would suddenly feel that his sister-in-law was quite cute. Therefore, even without Qin Yongyan saying anything, Qin Shi had already decided that he must wake his sister-in-law up tonight. As a result, as the brother-in-law, tonight, under the eyes of his wife, he sneaked into his sister-in-law's room. After all, Ying was his lover, so Qin Shi didn't need any medium at all. He could directly find Qin Ruoying's soul among the thousands of souls. His sister-in-law didn't have this kind of spiritual bond with him, so Qin Shi needed some kind of medium to find her soul. This medium was naturally Qin Xueqing's physical body. Qin Shueching was still wearing the white training clothes that she wore before she fainted. After Qin Shi pushed open the door and entered, the first thing that came into his sight were the two towering mountains. His wife was in the opposite room, but as the brother-in-law, he sneaked into his sister-in-law's room in the middle of the night. Although he did it to do a good deed, this kind of feeling was somewhat strange. Moreover, with Qin Shi's cultivation, what difference did it make if his sister-in-law wore clothes in front of him? Of course, Qin Shi was not a lecherous and wretched person, so he immediately withdrew his divine sense, then closed his eyes and came to Qin Shueching's side. Qin Shi sat down beside his sister-in-law with his legs crossed and placed the soul mirror flat on her forehead before sending his consciousness into it again. As the saying goes, unfamiliar the first time, familiar the second. With the previous two experiences under his belt, Qin Shi was already very familiar with the process of entering the soul mirror again. It was still that space of consciousness. But this time, however, the space of consciousness that Qin Shi saw was different from the last time. Instead, it was like before the chaos was formed. The dim aurora and the green nether river were gone. All that was left were thousands of unconscious souls drifting about in the chaos. After Qin Shi arrived, the thousands of Yin souls immediately fled in all directions as if they were avoiding the god of plague. Seeing this, Qin Shi did not have any suspicions. After he poured his inner yuan into Qin Shueching's body, a glimmer of light appeared between Qin Shueching's eyebrows. Then, a wisp of Yin soul flew out from the thousands of Yin souls, then went straight to Qin Shi's side and began to circle around his soul. Qin Shi observed carefully, and after confirming that this wisp of Yin soul had Qin Shueching's aura, he wrapped it with his own soul and brought it out of the soul mirror. After Qin Shi released this wisp of Yin soul, it directly disappeared into Qin Shueching's forehead. Then, Qin Shueching's eyelids trembled slightly. Seeing this, Qin Shi did not show any joy on his face. Instead, he suddenly frowned. Because he realized that the entire process was unbelievably smooth. It was different from when he was searching for Ying's soul. This time, it felt as if the soul mirror had taken the initiative to return Qin Shueching's soul to him. How could Qin Shi not find this strange? After all, the soul mirror was a connate treasure. Qin Shi would not be surprised if an artifact spirit was born from it. At this thought, Qin Shi immediately held the soul mirror in his hand and began to seriously think about everything he saw in the soul mirror. Why was it so easy to find his sister-in-law's soul after he spent so much effort to find a part of Ying's soul? Also, what was the situation with the Nether River? Why did Ying's soul appear at the end of the Nether River? Previously, he had been anxious to find Qin Ruoying's soul, so Qin Shi did not pay too much attention to these details. He thought that these images were just projections of his consciousness. Qin Ruoying was very important to him. After this thought was projected into his consciousness, it naturally made sense that Qin Ruoying's soul was at the end of the Nether River. But the problem was, the soul mirror wasn't his magic treasure. How could it be affected by his consciousness and place Ying's soul at the end of the Nether River? Moreover, when he brought out Qin Ruoying's soul, the resistance was so great that Ying lost a part of her soul. So why was it so easy and smooth when he brought out his sister-in-law's soul? The more Qin Shi thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. Abnormal things in the world were strange. This was just too strange. How many more secrets was this broken mirror hiding? At this thought, Qin Shi prepared to let his soul out of his body again and explore the soul mirror. However, right at this moment, Qin Shueching suddenly opened her eyes. The soul state was unconscious, so Qin Shueching's memory was still stuck at the time before she fell into a coma. Therefore, when she opened her eyes and saw Qin Shi sitting by her bed, Qin Shueching was stunned. Qin Shi was so focused on the soul mirror that he did not notice that Qin Shueching had woken up. Although Qin Shueching was almost 30 years old, she was still an unmarried virgin. She had never even held hands with anyone. It was already the middle of the night. How could Qin Shueching not be shocked when a man like Qin Shi suddenly appeared by her bed? Brother-in-law sneaked into her room? How was she going to face people in the future? Her sister-in-law had a bad temper. After being provoked, he went berserk on the spot and directly kicked at Qin Shi's waist. This kick, she had used 120% of her strength. After all, Qin Shueqing had already stepped into the Heavenly Man stage and was a genuine Golden Core stage cultivator. At such a close distance, plus the fact that Qin Shi was completely unguarded. Therefore, by the time Qin Shi reacted, her leg had already kicked Qin Shi's waist. Crack. With a muffled sound, her sister-in-law's right leg was immediately fractured. Then, her entire body was thrown away by Qin Shi's protective chi like a rag doll that had been casually thrown away. If Qin Shi had not used his true essence to catch her in time, Qin Shueqing would have crashed through several walls before falling to the ground. Hey, that, Qin Shi tried to explain, but Qin Shueqing did not give him a chance to explain. Instead, she pointed at the door and shouted, "Get out. Get out of here." "Okay, don't be agitated, I'll go out now." He had clearly come to do a good deed, but in the end, he was like a thief who had been caught red-handed. In this regard, Qin Shi could only helplessly shake his head and then run out of the East Wing like he was escaping. It was bad enough to be misunderstood by his sister-in-law. Who would have thought, as soon as Qin Shi walked out of the East Wing, he met Qin Ruoying's cold gaze head-on. How sharp were the eyes and ears of a heavenly man. As soon as Qin Shueqing made a sound, she had already gotten up to check on the situation. After seeing Qin Shi come out, Qin Ruoying did not say a word. After a bang sound, she closed the door and went back to the room to comfort the little fellow who had just woken up. Qin Shi stood in the courtyard with a helpless expression. He looked left and right at the East Wing, then at the West Wing, only to feel a chill in his heart. This was great. The yellow mud had really fallen into his crotch. Even if it was not sh*t, it was sh*t. Then, Qin Shi gloomily set up a soundproof restriction in the courtyard. Please remember the domain name of this book. .com, wonderful book mobile version website. .com. Chapter 453. There were 8 immortal arts. Pills, talismans, weapon formations, and witchcraft. They were, pills, talismans, weapon refinement, formations, casting witchcraft, and puppetry. The first 4 were more commonly used. Basically, every orthodox cultivator would gradually learn and master them as they cultivated. The last 4, on the other hand, weren't all that impressive, so only those with crooked paths would focus on them. No one was perfect, including Qin Shi. In online gaming terms, Qin Shi was a top laner who focused on head-on combat. Although he knew a little bit of miscellaneous skills, they were merely summoner skills. When it came to weapon refinement, alchemy, formations, and so on, the support healer was clearly the true professional. Hence, Qin Shi's head hurt. The heaven-bearing efficacious floating mirror was a connate peerless treasure. Qin Shi didn't know much about connate peerless treasures. It was said that only tribulation ascension cultivators who'd undergone the baptism of heavenly tribulations could refine their own personal treasures with the connate true essence in their bodies. Only then could they truly refine a connate peerless treasure. From this, one could see just how rare connate peerless treasures were. It was for this reason that Qin Shi, who'd only been in the soul formation stage, didn't have the right to come into contact with a connate peerless treasure. Of course, even if Qin Shi had obtained a connate peerless treasure by chance, that didn't mean he could use it for himself. The logic was actually quite simple. It was like a poor bastard suddenly obtaining the keys to a Ferrari. He probably wouldn't even know how to start the engine after getting in. There were many types of treasures. Judging from how the soul mirror had been activated a few times, it was most likely a support-type treasure. Support-type treasures were usually refined for specific situations and weren't very practical. Hence, after the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor passed away, the soul mirror had been placed in the Imperial Hall to collect dust. The soul mirror was far beyond what Qin Shi could grasp. Hence, he couldn't find the correct way to activate it after flipping the mirror over and over again for an entire night. Speaking of which, it was strange. After Qin Shi brought out his sister-in-law's soul, the soul mirror suddenly shut down like a phone with no battery. After that, no matter how hard he tried, he was unable to let his spirit enter it again. It was as if the soul mirror had been reduced to an ordinary item, and the space of his consciousness had been completely shut off. He couldn't very well try to break open the soul mirror, could he? Magic treasures needed to be recharged. Soul Mirror had created a white hole to engulf a large world, then forcibly reverse the orbits of the 9 planets, thereby expending a lot of energy. Was that why it needed some time to recover? Qin pondered for a long time before coming to such a conclusion. Only then did he feel slightly relieved. Heaven and earth can bear witness. He really didn't want to use this opportunity to spend a few more days with the amnesiac Ying so that he could have a change of taste. The next morning, following the loud and clear cry of the rooster next door, the little fellow slowly woke up from her sleep. She didn't know what happened last night, but she was keenly aware that her mother didn't give her father a good look during the meal. As such, the smart little fellow wisely kept her mouth shut and put on her little backpack after breakfast. Perhaps it was because his sister-in-law was too embarrassed to see anyone after the farce last night, so she left the courtyard in the middle of the night, and no one knew where she was now. Qin wanted to explain the situation to her, but he saw that she was being very unapproachable, so he wisely disappeared from her sight. His sister-in-law had left, but Qin Ruoying was still there. Thus, Qin made his way to the west wing and politely knocked on the door before yelling into the room, "Nian Nian, let's go. Daddy will take you to school today." "Okay." The little fellow immediately ran out of the room after hearing Qin's call. As soon as she stepped out of the door, she spread open her arms as if asking Qin to carry her. After Qin picked her up from the ground, the little fellow turned her head and coyly asked into the room, "Mommy, aren't you taking me to school?" The room was quiet, and Qin Ruoying didn't seem to have any intention of replying. The father and daughter waited for a while and couldn't help but look at each other. Thus, the little fellow whispered into Qin's ear, "Daddy, did you make Mommy angry?" "How would I dare?" Qin smiled bitterly and shook his head. Hearing this, the little fellow's big eyes immediately started to spin. "Daddy, do you want me to help you coax Mommy out?" This little fellow was so mischievous, she actually used the word coax. After Qin heard this, he immediately put her back on the ground. The father and daughter looked at each other tacitly. After that, the little fellow seemed to have received some kind of order, and quickly ran back into the room. "Mommy, take me to school, let's take the bus, it's fun." "You haven't been to my school yet. The teacher said she wants to see you." Come on. No matter how the little fellow acted coquettishly, Qin Ruoying didn't reply. In fact, since she woke up, she hadn't said more than 10 words. She was like an observer from outer space, coldly watching everything that happened around her. She only listened, but didn't speak. She didn't speak, nor did she chase the little fellow away. The little fellow grabbed her hand tightly, shaking her head and wagging her tail, constantly acting coquettishly. Finally, Qin Ruoying seemed to be convinced. As soon as she stood up, the little fellow began to drag her out with all her might. Of course, if she didn't want to go out, how could the little fellow pull her? Qin Ruoying did go out, but she still didn't give Qin a good look. She didn't even look at Qin, as if such a big person didn't exist. Therefore, the little fellow held her father's left hand and her mother's right hand, like a bridge between the two. Time to go to school. The sun shines in the sky, the flowers smile at me, the little bird says good morning. Why do you carry explosives on your back? Like the most ordinary family of 3, the little fellow pulled the couple onto the bus to school. Qin and Qin Ruoying didn't speak on the way, but the little fellow seemed to have been injected with stimulants, chattering non-stop along the way, even disturbing the passengers on the side. After Qin apologized to the nearby passengers in a low voice, he didn't stop the little fellow from continuing, but motioned for her to speak softly and slowly. Dad was listening carefully. Big things like arguing with others, small things like who borrowed her eraser. The little fellow chattered non-stop, and Qin listened with interest. And at this time, after getting on the bus, Qin Ruoying, who had been looking out of the window, finally looked like a sculpture that came to life. She turned her head, her eyes paused on Qin's face for a second, and then completely focused on the little fellow. Looking at Nianyan's little face that had turned red with excitement. At that moment, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but reach out and pinch her little face. Chapter 454. Qin Ruoying's subconscious affectionate actions were naturally seen by Qin Shi. Therefore, Qin Shi immediately put on a calm and collected expression, as if to imply that he did not see anything. There were many types of amnesia. The most common situation was not being able to recognize one's loved ones. However, they could still speak, write, draw, and have the ability to take care of themselves in daily life. Therefore, amnesia did not mean that one had lost their intelligence. And it was precisely because Qin Ruoying had lost her memory that everything was so new and strange to her. She was very clear about the meaning of the word mother, but she did not dislike the little fellow calling her mother left and right. Every time she heard the little fellow call her mother, she instinctively wanted to respond. If it was not for the special reserved nature of women stopping her, Qin Ruoying would have already held the little fellow in her arms and caressed him. Of course, Qin Ruoying could accept the little fellow, but it did not mean that she could accept Qin Shi. Women always had to be a little guarded against men. The kind of woman who would completely fall into a man's good intentions could only play the role of a victim in a relationship. The one who cannot get is in an uproar, the one who is favored is fearless. No matter where it was, this sentence was absolutely regarded as the supreme truth. Therefore, even though Qin Shi had already stepped into the insightful emptiness realm, he was still deeply immersed in it, and even somewhat enjoyed it. The capital-affiliated primary school was not far from Hohai, about 7 or 8 stops away. After the family of 3 got off the car, the little fellow, like other children, held his father in one hand and his mother in the other, and skipped towards the school gate. Although the school was chosen by Qin Shi, this was the first time he came, so he could not help but use his divine sense to carefully scan the school. And, overall, it was not bad, at least he did not find any filth hidden under the sanctimonious surface. The management of a primary school was not as loose as a kindergarten, so Qin Shi and Qin Ruoying could not even enter the school gate, and could only stand at the school gate and say goodbye to the little fellow. Dad, goodbye. Mom, goodbye. I will listen to teacher obediently. Remember to pick me up after school. Perhaps it was because Qin Shi and Qin Ruoying were sending Nian to school for the first time, and because the couple was too good-looking, even the guards at the entrance couldn't help but take a few more glances at them. Nian was the most popular person in the class. Therefore, after many parents sent their children to school, they could not help but stand at the side and whisper to each other. Is that child the one who dared to hit someone on the first day of reporting? Yes, he's in the same class as our Yang. He's very handsome, but his temper is too bad. He doesn't look like a girl at all. I don't know how his family educated him. Didn't you say you were going to fire her last time? Why are you still here? Expelled? Don't joke around. She's the class monitor now. She got full marks in the first half of the exam. Every parent-teacher meeting, she'll be singled out for praise. Oh. This little girl is so powerful. How is she powerful? Isn't it because her family is powerful? At this point, a trace of displeasure flashed across the parent's face. Then, with a look of disdain, she said, I heard that her family has an education system. They're different from us commoners. Her performance in school directly affects the evaluation of the school. How can a child like this not be powerful? I see. Qin Shi quietly listened to the conversation from the side. It was because Nian's performance in school was too outstanding that these parents began to suspect that the school had given Nian special treatment. If one thought about it carefully, this kind of narrow-minded thinking could be understood. Every parent wanted their child to be outstanding and stand out from the crowd. Any child who was able to enter the capital-affiliated primary school had at least gone through several rounds of screening. Basically, it could be concluded that they were good seedlings that far surpassed their peers. But it was a pity that excellence was always measured by comparison. Compared to Nian, even the smartest and most outstanding child could only be reduced to ordinary in the end. After all, when it came to comparing fathers, no one could compare to her. When he left the last time, Qin Shi was worried that he would take a long time to come back, so he took the initiative to remove the first layer of seal on Nian's body. It was also from then on that Nian gradually became different from other children. Although Nian didn't know how to cultivate, she had already found a sense of qi when she was 5 years old. This innate affinity for spirit energy was something that many people didn't have. This was the so-called talent that was bestowed to her by God. Others couldn't be envious of it. Chen Shi had been gone for more than a year, and Nian had also been washed by the tide of spirit energy in the courtyard for more than a year. She was still young, so she couldn't see anything for the time being. But if she continued to develop at this speed, it was estimated that it wouldn't be long before Nian would be able to skip a grade. Skip from 1st grade to 3rd grade, 3rd grade to 6th grade. Skip from 1st grade to 3rd grade, and directly enter university in 1st grade. At that time, she probably wouldn't be an adult and would have graduated from university. Could it be, in the future, would he have to send Nian to the junior class of the Chinese Academy of Science? Chen Shi was still seriously thinking about whether to put the seal back. After Qin Ruoying saw Nian's figure disappear, she turned around and walked out along the street. Seeing this, Chen Shi had to temporarily put this problem to the back of his mind, and then quickly followed. "Hey, Ying, where are you going?" This time, there was no little guy in the middle to act as a bridge, so Chen Shi didn't dare to follow too closely. Seeing that he was so self-conscious, Qin Ruoying let him be. As a result, the couple who were incomparably loving in the past were now like a couple who quarreled and broke up. One in front and one behind, they were silent and walked aimlessly on the street. Well, in addition to taking care of Nian's daily life, Chen Shi also had to pay attention to not let his wife get lost at all times, back to the cloud-piercing shuttle that accidentally broke into the Tianshu ruins. This cloud-piercing shuttle was not simple. Its source of power was completely dependent on spirit stones. As long as there were enough spirit stones, it could even cross the entire Milky Way. Earth was about 6 billion kilometers away from the Oort Nebula. Even if it flew at the speed of light, it would take nearly 6 hours to reach it. Although the cloud-piercing shuttle's flying speed did not exceed the speed of light, it could perform short-distance space jumps. And this was the embodiment of the true meaning of the word void that Dongshu stage cultivators used. Cheng-Hua and Yi Ji. Just like that, the two daring youths piloted the cloud-piercing shuttle towards the direction of the sun. Along the way, they discovered many planets, from Pluto to Neptune, then to Saturn and Jupiter. Although these planets were large in size, they were all dead planets. So even though the two of them kept stopping along the way, they quickly arrived at Mars. After Cheng-Hua drove the cloud-piercing shuttle around Mars, an aqua-blue planet came into view. Yi Ji was the first to discover that this planet was different from the rest. The planet's environment directly affected its color, so under normal circumstances, one only needed to look at the color of the planet to determine if it was suitable for habitation. Earth was aqua blue, like a sparkling and translucent sapphire. It was very beautiful. But the most eye-catching thing about it was the spirit chi of heaven and earth that kept flowing out. This was a sacred cultivation ground? Yi Ji was stunned. After being stunned for a long while, he excitedly pulled on Cheng-Hua's sleeve and shouted, "Cheng-Hua, look, there's spirit chi on that planet. Please remember the domain name of this book." 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Website. Chapter 455. Not every planet could nurture life, and not every planet could produce heaven and earth spirit chi. Therefore, planets like Earth that could nurture life and produce heaven and earth spirit chi at the same time were usually extremely rare. Cultivators would call such an existence a holy land for cultivation. The important thing to mention here was, although it could be called a holy land for cultivation as long as it met the above two conditions, the holy land for cultivation did not necessarily refer to a single planet. Even if it was just a void crack in the universe, or a continent formed after a planet shattered, as long as it could nurture life and produce heaven and earth spirit chi at the same time, it could be called a holy land for cultivation. Because of the effect of gravity, all the planets in the universe were spherical. It was impossible for there to be a situation where the sky was round and the earth was round like in ancient myths. If there was, then this holy land for cultivation would definitely not be a celestial body that existed naturally, but something forcefully created by a high-level cultivator with supreme magic power. For example, a strange existence like a great world. Earth was really too beautiful. It was a natural product from the chaotic universe. how could man-made things compare to it? The Supreme Palace enclosure sounded very powerful, right? It was actually just a continental plate floating in the universe. Enclosure, read, Yuan, as in broken walls and ruins. Cheng Hua and Yi Ji had grown up in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Even though they would explore other planets when they had nothing to do, looking for life planets for fun, they had never found a true planet-level holy land for cultivation. The universe was really too big. If the Supreme Palace enclosure was a grape, then Earth, which was much bigger than it, was an apple. A bright red apple. Therefore, the two youths were like Columbus who had discovered a new continent. They were so excited that they could not control themselves. The Dubhe Ruins. It really was the Dubhe Ruins. Since it could be called a ruin, then the cultivation heritage on this planet had probably been cut off a long time ago. And didn't this mean that they could create their own heritage here and take the Dubhe Ruins for themselves? Let's go and take a look. After hearing Yi Ji's words, Cheng Hua carefully sized up the planet. After he confirmed that there were no defensive formations on it, Cheng Hua could no longer contain his excitement. He drove the cloud-piercing shuttle and rushed over. Wait, we haven't confirmed if there's any danger up there. If we barge in rashly like this, we won't be able to deal with any danger with our current cultivation, so I think we should inform our family first and wait for them to send reinforcements. As he spoke, Yi Ji took out a voice transmission spirit talisman. Seeing this, Cheng Hua couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then, he pretended to be indifferent and replied, well, okay. Wait a moment, I'll activate the talisman now. Ch Chung 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 Chan Chung Ch Chung Ch. Cheng Hua actually took advantage of the time when he was distracted, and snatched the talisman from his hand, and fiercely tore it into pieces. Chung Chs Chung Ch. Cheng Hua's actions angered Yi Ji. Just as he was about to teach Cheng Hua a lesson, Cheng Hua completely ignored him. Instead, he directly made the cloud-piercing shuttle perform a space leap. Whoosh! Yi Ji felt his vision blur. When he could see his surroundings clearly again, he realized that he was already in the orbit of the moon. The blue planet was not far in front of him. Because they were so close, Yi Ji could even see the mountains and rivers on the ground with his naked eyes. Seeing this, Yi Ji was not happy. Instead, he was angry. He hurriedly turned his head and realized that the high-grade spirit stone at the front of the ship had lost its luster. This was a sign that the spirit stone had been used up. Their cultivation levels were too low, so they could only rely on the spirit stone to drive the cloud-piercing shuttle. If they were flying normally, it would be fine. There was no resistance in the universe, so the consumption would be very low. But if they performed a space leap, every space leap was equivalent to the full-strength attack of a Dongshu stage cultivator. Thus, even a high-grade spirit stone of exceptional quality could not support the cloud-piercing shuttle to perform space leaps frequently. The two of them had only brought a total of 2 upper-grade spirit stones with them this time. Now that they had wasted one, how could Yi Ji not feel distressed? Are you crazy? You want to jump such a short distance? Once the spirit stone is used up, what are we going to do? Don't tell me you really want to fly back slowly? Yi Ji looked as if he expected better from him. Cheng Hua, on the other hand, smiled cheekily and did not seem to mind. Their cultivations were on par with each other, so it was impossible for Yi Ji to take him down easily. Tell me, what exactly do you want? Seeing Yi Ji's impatient expression, Cheng Hua knew that he was really angry this time. Thus, Cheng Hua immediately put away his cheeky smile and said to Yi Ji in an extremely serious tone, Yi Ji, have you heard of an old saying? Life and death are up to fate. Riches and honor are found in danger. Since the two of us can obtain this opportunity, why should we be so cautious and overcautious? You and I are both bastards in our families. We are not well liked. Once the news gets out, we will not be able to eat meat and soup. Hearing this, Yi Ji could not help but interrupt him. He said anxiously, do you really think this heavenly pivot ruins is a good place? There might be some great danger lurking within. With the cultivation of the two of us. Whether it is dangerous or not, we will know once we explore. Cheng Hua did not wait for Yi Ji to finish and interrupted him decisively. He had already made his decision. So no matter how much Yi Ji objected, Cheng Hua had to go and explore today. Yi Ji wanted stability. Cheng Hua wanted danger. This was the first time the two of them had such a huge difference in opinion. Cheng Hua stiffened his neck and refused to budge. Seeing this, Yi Ji could only sigh and compromise. Fine, I am afraid of you. I will listen to you, but you must remember, the moment we discover anything wrong, we must leave this place immediately. I do not want to be buried with you. His anger was real, and so was his friendship. Seeing Cheng Hua so determined, Yi Ji could only let him be. All right, don't worry, I may be brave, but I am not stupid. Moreover, we still have the cloud-piercing shuttle. Even if we encounter danger, we can easily retreat. Cheng Hua blinked and began to pilot the cloud-piercing shuttle towards Earth. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Website.